Good morning. It's 7 o'clock. On today's show, 1 dead and 6 missing after a super yacht sinks in a tornado off the coast of Sicily. We'll be live on the scene.
Plus, is the government putting the unions before pensioners? We'll speak to the Secretary of State for Wales in the next few minutes.
It's Tuesday, the 20th of August. Your headlines.
Here in Sicily, the search for the missing people has resumed after a luxury super yacht has sunk off the coast of Palermo.
British tech tycoon Mike Lynch and his teenage daughter are among those missing. He'd spoken about having a second life after being acquitted for fraud. Also ahead, his farewell speech to the Democratic Convention as President. Joe Biden admits he's made mistakes, but says he's always given his best.
All this talk about how I'm angry at all those people who said I should step down. That's not true.
He had hoped that he would be the headline. Instead, he was the warm-up. We will have all the very latest from the first night of the Democratic Party convention here in Chicago.
Plus, the government meets with the rail union this morning for talks on a pay deal to avoid more strikes. And a supermoon lights up the skies around the world. A very good morning to you. The search has just resumed in Italy for 6 people missing after a super yacht sank during a tornado yesterday morning. The £30 million yacht was anchored near the port of Porticello in Sicily when the storm hit. Among the 22 people on board were British businessman Mike Lynch and his teenage daughter. Let's get out to Ashna Hiranag, who's in Sicily for us this morning. Ashna, what is the latest in terms of the search for those missing?
Well, there's plenty of activity this morning here on the harbour side. As you might be able to see behind me, there are fire and rescue teams, search and rescue teams here too, as cave divers about to resume their search this morning. They got on site here at about 6:30 this morning. They are incredibly experienced in assessing and navigating these confined dark spaces, and it will be key to their search, trying to get to the hull of that 56-metre super yacht, which we know sank very, very early yesterday morning. We know that there was a huge amount of bad weather overnight that may have hampered their efforts through the evening. But here is what we know of the tragedy so far. In Sicily, they're searching for survivors. 50 metres beneath these now calm waters are the remains of a super yacht. A luxury vessel which was carrying 22 people when it was hit by extreme weather. Relentless rain and wind battered the north coast of Sicily in the early hours of Monday, causing widespread damage on the land and proving fatal at sea. Fisherman Fabio was the first to the wreckage.
There were 2 sailboats half a mile away from the harbour with their anchors at sea. After 10 minutes, we saw a flare in the sky. We waited about 10 minutes to see the intensity of the tornado and went out to sea. We were first to give rescue, but we found no one at sea. We only found cushions and the remains of the boat.
The 56-metre yacht was carrying 12 passengers and 10 crew members when it got into trouble. 15 people, including 35-year-old Charlotte Golunski, her partner and her 1-year-old baby Sophia, managed to escape. But among those reportedly still missing, the boat's owner, British tech tycoon Mike Lynch. The 59-year-old entrepreneur had recently been in the headlines after he was cleared of all charges in a high-profile fraud case in the US related to the sale of his software company. It's believed his wife is one of those rescued, but there are local reports his 18-year-old daughter Hannah is also missing. The weather was so bad overnight that locals describe it being like nothing they'd ever seen before. Waterspouts, essentially like tornadoes on the water, tore into the coastline. The yacht had been anchored just over there. The sailing mast lights had been twinkling in the night sky, and by morning, they were gone. As Coast Guards, firefighters and specialist divers continue to search for the missing, investigators are piecing together the yacht's last voyage. It had sailed from the Sicilian port of Milazzo on the 14th of August, making its way towards Porticello. By the 19th, the vessel was recorded as being anchored just off the coast near the village port. That's where it was when the storm hit, leaving passengers scrambling for safety in the dark.
Survivors are not talking much. They are very confused because it happened at night. It was dark and they found themselves in the water. Some of them were lucky enough to save themselves and were taken directly to the emergency room.
As medics tend to survivors, authorities haven't given up on those still lost at sea. Divers have already found one body near the wreckage. And they know, with every hour that passes, this rescue mission moves closer to becoming a recovery.
Ashna, I'm interested in if there are any more details that have come to light on exactly how events unfolded and around what time they unfolded as to why this ship in particular suffered so badly from this tornado, when it sounds like from the testimony of the fishermen you spoke to that other boats were at least roughly in the vicinity at the time?
There is some speculation about the design and perhaps the what happened to the 75-metre mast, which was very iconic on this particular yacht. It was said to be the tallest aluminium mast, and people here last night were talking about how they could see it glistening by night, but by morning that seemed to have completely gone underwater along with the rest of the yacht itself. It's thought that perhaps that mast, some speculation, that it may have got caught up in this rotating column of cloud, these water spouts that we've been talking about, essentially like tornadoes on the water, and that may have caused it to break and may have caused the boat to then go on to capsize. But look, we're in the very, very early stages, and we know that the investigations are going on with the Port Authority now involved, but also investigators and inspectors from the UK Marine Accident and Investigation Branch. They are making their way to Palermo today. We've also heard a little bit more about those on board and those, crucially, who are still missing. 6 people missing, we know, 1 confirmed dead. Among those who are missing is Mike Lynch, as you mentioned, but also his 18-year-old daughter, Hannah. Another person that's missing too is Jonathan Bloomer, the chairman of Morgan Stanley International. Chris Morvello, he is a lawyer from the law firm Clifford Chance. He was also on board yesterday. And also another man, Salvatore Cucina, the head of the Civil Protection Service here in Sicily. And little is known too about the body of the man that was found very near the wreckage of the vessel yesterday morning, but there are some reports within Italian media today that could well have been the chef on board the yacht.
Ashna, thanks so much for that detail. We're back with Ashna later in the show, as well as speaking to a journalist there, a local journalist there in Palermo. But let's also just talk about some of the background, because less than 3 months ago, businessman Mike Lynch was cleared of fraud over the purchase of his company Autonomy some 12 years ago. Just a few days ago, his co-defendant in that trial was killed in a car accident. Sadia is here to tell us more about that separate incident. Sadia.
Yeah, so over the weekend, Cambridgeshire Police put out an appeal for more information and any dashcam footage about a road accident after which a man in his 50s was taken to hospital with serious injuries. It has now emerged that Stephen Chamberlain, who was Mike Lynch's co-defendant in that US fraud trial, has died following a road accident. He was the former vice president of the company Autonomy, and his lawyer said he was hit by a car while out running on Saturday morning, roughly the same time as that road accident happened in Cambridgeshire. He had faced the same charges as Mike Lynch of conspiracy and fraud. Both men were cleared by a jury in San Francisco in June. And his lawyer has put out a statement saying, "Our dear client and friend Stephen Chamberlain was fatally struck by a car on Saturday while out running. He was a courageous man with unparalleled integrity, and we deeply miss him."
Sadia, thanks so much. To the US now, where Joe Biden has given his farewell speech to the Democratic Convention. The president admitted that he had made mistakes in 50 years of frontline politics, but said he'd always given his best. Our US correspondent, Mark Stone, joins us now from Chicago. And Mark, there was a clear tone overall to his speech, which was his love for his country.
Hi, Wilf. Yeah, a very good morning from Chicago and day 1 of the Democratic Party convention, and a time slot which Joe Biden, President Biden, never wanted to take. He had hoped that he would be speaking here on Thursday night as the Democratic Party nominee for president, but it wasn't to be. It was exactly a month ago that he dramatically stepped aside to be replaced by Kamala Harris, who will now be anointed, crowned as the Democratic Party nominee later this week. And so instead, it was his speech that came at the very beginning of this convention. A couple of hours ago, this place was absolutely packed as everyone gathered to hear from President Biden, wondering what sort of tone he would take. It was a speech full of emotion. It was Ashley Biden who ushered her father, the American president, into the convention that he had so bitterly believed should have been his crowning moment. It was always going to be emotional for the Bidens, for the Democratic Party, and so it was. To chants of "We Love Joe" that went on for 4 minutes, they cheered the man who carried this party to victory over Donald Trump 4 years ago, the man they just believed would not be able to do it again.
I made a lot of mistakes in my career, but I gave my best to you. For 50 years, like many of you, I've given my heart and soul to our nation. And I've been blessed a million times in return for the support of the American people.
Well, he had hoped, he had believed that he would be the headline, not the warm-up. But any bitterness he has about being forced aside, it's not been on show. As for the crowd here, for them, this is about thanking him for more than half a century in politics. It was a speech highlighting what he believes to be his achievements, but the framing was we, not me.
When I say we, I mean Kamala and me.
There were his familiar warnings about what he believes to be the existential threat of a second Trump term, but he balanced it with messages of hope and achievement.
MAGA Republicans found out the power of women in 2022. And Donald Trump is going to find out the power of women in 2024.
The night had started with the next generation, the Soul Children of Chicago, and the Star-Spangled Banner to begin this star-studded convention. It's hard to believe that all of this, those new faces, new energy, has all come together in a few short weeks.
This is going to be a great week, and I want to kick us off by celebrating our incredible President Joe Biden.
This first night was not about her, but about the man who put her here by agreeing to step aside. And those who were instrumental in that push, like Nancy Pelosi, were here now to salute President Biden for passing the baton. But before he would speak, the person who couldn't manage what Kamala Harris thinks she now can, Hillary Clinton. She cracked that glass ceiling, and to roars, she said now is the moment to break it.
On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States.
And so the baton has now been passed. The job he thought he could do is now in the hands of the Vice President, beating the opponent who is now hers, not his. Doubts about her ability, her winnability, may persist privately, but here, for now, no sense of it.
Mark, I thought it was just absolutely fascinating when you snapshot where we were 4 weeks ago and the resilience, perhaps you'd even say stubbornness of President Biden not to want to stand aside, to now come forward and be willing to give Kamala Harris such a platform, a united party platform as a leaping off point. And I guess the only question that remains is whether in his heart he's doing so with contentment or still some animosity towards the way that he was ultimately pushed aside by his party. But I guess the result for Kamala Harris and for the election ahead is a clearly united party, which is a far cry from just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, it really is. Contentment? No, I don't think so. I think Very different vibe indeed. As it is, this is a campaign, we talk about vibes a lot, but this is a campaign under Kamala Harris over the past month that has been driven on vibes, on just that, but very little in the way of policy. No interviews by Kamala Harris. She's done not one since she took over the baton. She's appeared in many, many stump speeches at rallies. The crowds have been very large, although Donald Trump, clearly bothered by that, has been trying to pretend they haven't been large. The truth is they have been very large, but there hasn't been a great deal of policy from her, and that, I think, Wilf, is what people are certainly expecting over the course of the next few days and the weeks between now and the election, because she has, as one person said the other day, got to turn sizzle into steak. She's got to make this, feels a bit like cotton candy at the moment. There's not much basis to what she has been proposing, what she is trying to sell, what she wants the American people to latch onto. She needs to give off some detailed policy. That, I think, will come in the days ahead, and it will come with a star-studded cast of former presidents, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, and a sprinkling of celebrities to boot.
Mark, you've been in the US too long. I've been there, so this is an observation, not a criticism. What's cotton candy for our audience back here?
Oh, they have to find out, Wilf. Come on.
It's delicious, either way. Anyway, Mark, great stuff. But a bit of candy floss. There we go, getting a mention in Mark's report there. Mark Stone from Chicago, a very good morning to you. Now, we're on to some of today's other stories. The US Secretary of State is set to travel to Egypt today after what he called a constructive meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Antony Blinken urged Hamas to agree to a US-backed ceasefire deal in Gaza that is understood to have Israel's support. However, a senior Hamas official criticised the move, saying it's not what was presented to us nor what we agreed on. Ted Baker is expected to close the rest of its stores in the UK and Republic of Ireland by the end of today. The firm behind the fashion chain's UK arm fell into administration back in March. More than 500 jobs are thought to be at risk. A group of scientists want primary school children to be given ice lollies during lessons to improve their understanding of science. It's reported that children welcome the move. Members of the Royal Society of Chemistry say licking a lolly in class will help young people learn more about the way temperature works. The first £1 coins featuring King Charles have entered circulation. The King's official effigy can be seen on the head side, while a pair of bees grace the tail side in recognition of the monarch's passion for conservation. I mean, of course, the King's head is on the head side. Nearly 3 million coins with the new design will circulate alongside those featuring the late Queen Elizabeth. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, and the new First Minister of Wales, Baroness Morgan, will travel to a wind farm later today as part of their first official visit together. Let's go to Cardiff and bring in the Wales Secretary, Jo Stevens. A very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
What's the main reason for the Prime Minister's trip today?
Well, the Prime Minister is in West Wales with the new First Minister, Eluned Morgan, to look at a renewable energy project that's been running in Wales, an onshore wind farm. And you'll know that within days of us coming into government in Westminster, we have reversed the ban on onshore wind in England. In Wales, we've been having onshore wind for some time. This is all about delivering our clean power mission by 2030 through onshore wind, offshore wind, new nuclear, solar, to bring down bills for everybody, households and businesses across the country, to make sure that the UK has energy security and independence, and also to create those jobs in our industries of the future.
Does onshore wind face local opposition?
Well, the project that's being seen today is actually a project where the local community, because they are hosting infrastructure, are benefiting from it financially because there will be an additional discount on their bills as a result. So this is a way of communities that host infrastructure that we all need in order to deliver that clean power mission by 2030, then benefiting through an increased discount on their bills. So it's a win-win.
I wanted to ask you about Operation Early Dawn, which, of course, has been put in place in the last couple of days. The correlation in terms of the locations of where it's been put in place does tally with the areas where they've seen the most arrests following the recent riots. Is Operation Early Dawn a direct response to the recent riots? And whether it is or isn't, is that a message that you're happy for people to be drawing a conclusion from, even if it's not meant to be there?
Well, there are two issues here. First of all, there is the emergency that we inherited from the previous Conservative government, because at the point that we came into government just 7 weeks ago, 99% of the adult male estate, prison estate, was full. And the government knew, the previous government knew there was a severe problem. The previous Lord Chancellor had tried to get the then Prime Minister to deal with it, and they had not dealt with it. They just ran away. They called an election and ran away. We are picking up the pieces of that. So we have put in place extra prison spaces in order to deal with that crisis, and the Lord Chancellor came to the Commons and gave a statement on that in the first week of our government. But there's this second issue now in terms of a particular problem around people who are arrested and held in custody and getting them then to the magistrates' court to be dealt with. And that's why the announcement has been made in terms of prison cells being used to house people whilst we get over that initial problem with it. But the fact is, we need to have more prison spaces. We are dealing with an emergency that we've inherited from the previous government, but we want to make sure that people who should be in custody are in custody and we're keeping the public safe.
And so are you OK? Is the government OK with Early Dawn being seen as a direct response to the riots?
Well, we've had violent disorder in this country, dreadful violent disorder, and the people who were responsible for that have been processed through the criminal justice system very quickly, very fairly, and they are now serving their custodial sentences. I think the public rightly expect the government to deal with this well, which we have done, and they rightly expect those people to be serving custodial sentences. That's why they're in, that's why they're in prison. That's why we need space for them.
But by the end of a 5-year term, do you expect the government to have built more prisons? If so, how many?
Well, we will have more prison spaces. We're going to have a prison strategy about having more space. But there's two parts to this. There is the fact that we need to have extra capacity, but there's also the fact that people who go to prison, there are two purposes for that. One is obviously you lose your livelihood and your liberty as a punishment. But secondly, you are supposed to undergo rehabilitation so that when you come out of prison, you don't get into a cycle of reoffending. Now, what we've seen over the last 14 years is a massive cycle of reoffending. Reoffending rates are too high because people were not being rehabilitated in prison. They were being kept locked up for 23 hours a day because there was insufficient capacity to get people out to do the education and the courses and the rehabilitation that they need to do within the prison estate. That has to be turned around, and we're determined to do that.
I wanted to touch on the recent spat with ASLEF, if we call it that. Is it worrying to you to see the government start to agree a deal on pay only for more strikes to be threatened in not just the years to come, the immediate years, but the immediate months to come, whether that's because of a slightly different dispute or not? Should they not all have been tied up at once?
Well, the Transport Secretary managed to solve a very long-running dispute very quickly. The previous government wouldn't even talk to ASLEF, the train drivers' union, in order to resolve it. I mean, incidentally, here in Wales, we didn't have those strikes because the Welsh government here negotiated and spoke with the unions and sorted it out very early on. There was no dispute. Now, that major long-running dispute that has cost, we think, about £850 million through lost working, has been resolved by the Transport Secretary. The separate dispute, which is between ASLEF and LNER, is not a dispute about pay. That is a dispute about local arrangements that are in place that have been agreed between the union and the rail operating company that the rail operating company has breached. And so we have encouraged them to get round the table and to get it sorted out, and I hope that they will do.
Well, but, I mean, clearly the government didn't have to negotiate immediately with ASLEF, but decided to do so. And
well, why wouldn't we resolve that dispute? It had cost.
Well, but then why didn't you resolve this next one as well? I mean, I think there's a fair point here.
£850 million. Why would a responsible government not try to resolve that dispute? We are doing exactly what a government should do, because the fact is the previous Conservative government failed to do it. That's why £850 million of taxpayers' money has been wasted. Now, this dispute, this extra additional small dispute between LNER and ASLEF, we want both parties to get around the table and sort it out, and I'm sure that they will.
But why, you said, why wouldn't you have got involved in the main dispute? Fair point. So why wouldn't you get involved in this next dispute as well?
we may need to get involved in that. But what we have said to both parties is that they should sort it out straight away. They should get around the table and negotiate, and we hope that's what they will do.
But you were criticising the government for not having, the last government for not having inserted itself in the way that you have in the main dispute. Can you see that it looks a little bit odd? It looks a little bit like positive.
The previous dispute that we were talking about went on for 2 years, 2 whole years, £850 million of taxpayers' money wasted. And here we are talking about a new dispute where it involves one train operating company, and that needs to be resolved locally between the train operating company and ASLEF. There is an agreement between the two parties that has been breached. So the way to resolve that is for the breaches to stop, for people to be able to get on with their job, and for passengers to know that they can get on LNER trains on time and arrive at their destination on time.
OK. I mean, the final question from me on this is, stepping back, if members of the ASLEF union, who your government has just handed a big pay rise to, end up striking almost regardless of what the reason is, weeks or months after getting a big pay rise from the government, will you feel disappointed and like there's been an opportunity missed on behalf of the government?
Strikes are always a last resort for any trade union and any worker, because obviously you lose pay when you go on strike. We want this small dispute to be resolved locally between LNER and ASLEF. We hope that will happen as soon as possible, and I'm sure it will. Thanks
so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Let's discuss some of the takeaways from that interview with Mari, who's here. I thought it was really interesting that it was clearly an issue that upset Joe Stevens, that I was even going down that route. Yeah. I think the optics are what's so interesting. I mean, you've got to realise, I think, as a government minister, and probably as a union boss as well, that this is not going to look palatable to most people, even if there are very understandable issues at play. And clearly it's something that strikes a chord a little bit.
Yeah, I think Jo Stevens was really, really keen to emphasise, wasn't she, that the long dispute that had been going on 2 years, they had fixed. They really want to get the credit for that. And the difficulty is this fresh strike from ASLEF has really undermined that and undermined that messaging of saying, actually, look, we've swooped in and within a couple of months of being in office, we're fixing all the strikes and we're getting on with the job. And then that's just really undermined that messaging. And so, you know, she was quite clearly frustrated by some of the questioning, because you're absolutely right. Irrespective of the reason behind the strike, rail passengers just see more strikes, and therefore they see their lives being more inconvenienced, more difficult, seeing friends, seeing family, hospital visits, whatever it might be. But I think the interesting line from the interview as well was she did say that they may need to get involved in that dispute. She was very much first and foremost, let's see if they can sort it out themselves, encouraging them to get around the table. She wants those breaches from LNER to stop. But nonetheless, the fact that that window is open for the government to actually intervene in this means that they are willing to really kind of muscle in if they feel it's necessary. So I think it depends on how that negotiation goes. The difficulty is, obviously, the more the government continues to get involved all the time, rather than these disputes being able to be sorted out between the unions and the rail groups and the train companies themselves, the more you get accused of kind of overreach, state overreach, and the state doing everything, which is always a criticism of the Labour Party.
Right, great stuff. Thanks so much. Lots more to come on The Breakfast Show. Joe Biden passes the torch to Kamala Harris, but has he done enough to convince voters she deserves the keys to the White House? We'll have more on that. Plus, a nautical gag wins funniest joke at the Edinburgh Fringe. We'll hear it firsthand from the comedian who penned it. And did you spot the supermoon? We'll bring you the best shots of last night's lunar spectacle. We'll be right back.
Having been home, I'm sure everyone knows it's been so busy, so it's still settling in, and then doing talks like this and interviews and speaking about it again kind of just brings it back up to level. I picked a bike up as a kid just because that's what everyone did, and you know, like riding around with your friends, going and playing out, playing football, whatever it was, and then seeing kids at the skate park doing tricks. I quickly swapped the bike for a BMX and just spent every waking moment of my day as a kid in the skate park, and it was just a hobby. And it's still now, I'm lucky enough that it's still a hobby. I still love riding, and it's just grown into something amazing. The more eyes you get on the sport, the better. And I think as well, it's often the support of parents who will now know that you can make a career in this sport might be more likely to push their kids into it rather than a more mainstream sport. So I think if kids saw BMX for the first time in the Olympics, that's a great first showing. And I really hope that kids who saw me ride, if they pick up a bike, that's absolutely amazing for me. Yeah, so the Olympics LA 2028 is definitely a focus of mine. Lucky enough for us, we don't have to qualify just yet. The next event is actually European Championships in September. So it's straight back into it for us. And then we've got British Championships as well as World Championships towards the end of the year. So we've still got a busy back end of the year, which is exciting. People talk about Olympic blues, and I think this is good for our sport, and the fact that we're busy straight after the games, it kind of avoids that because you've got something to work towards. So, yeah, excited to try and retain the European Championship in September.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester.
Welcome back. A reminder of the top stories this morning. In Italy, one body has been recovered and the search has resumed for 6 people who are still missing after their yacht sank in a freak storm. The British registered vessel capsized when it was hit by a tornado. British tech tycoon Mike Lynch is among the missing alongside Morgan Stanley International Chair Jonathan Bloomer and Clifford Chance lawyer Chris Morvillo. Members of the RMT union are expected to meet with government officials to discuss a new pay offer for rail staff, which would see the end of further strikes. Bosses, including the union's general secretary, say they want the same terms as has been offered to train drivers. Joe Biden's called on democracy to be preserved as he addressed the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The US president appeared tearful during his farewell speech, telling voters to endorse Kamala Harris for the sake of America's future. We're returning now to our top story, and among the 6 people missing in Sicily is British entrepreneur Mike Lynch. He'd been on board the boat celebrating the end of his lengthy legal woes. Only weeks ago, he'd been acquitted of fraud by a court in San Francisco following a 10-year battle over the sale of his company, Autonomy. He'd been accused of inflating its value when he sold it to US tech firm Hewlett-Packard back in 2011. Our Europe correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, has more.
We as humans like information to be in a human-friendly form, things like email, most web pages, web processor documents.
He's been described as Britain's Bill Gates. Mike Lynch rose to become one of the biggest names in British tech, with the huge success of his software company Autonomy, making him one of the UK's most successful entrepreneurs.
He is a giant of technology. There is no one like Mike Lynch that the UK has on the public stage. And he has, created 2 very large and very successful tech businesses, which are internationally renowned.
Brought up in Essex, the son of an Irish firefighter and nurse, the self-made businessman and father of 2, has become renowned in the tech world. But things started to go wrong in 2011 when Mike Lynch sold Autonomy to the American tech giant Hewlett-Packard for $11 billion, earning him an estimated $800 million. The sale led to 13 years of legal woes. HP alleged he and a colleague inflated the value of the company before he sold it, sparking a protracted court battle. As a result, he was extradited to the US for a fraud trial, where he also spent time under house arrest.
At that point, it's indescribable the way in which you jump between two universes.
Finally, in June this year, he was found not guilty of all of the charges.
He kept saying, this is like, I have a second life. I have a new lease on life. I've won my freedom. Now I have to figure out what to do with the rest of my life. And he was just really kind of in a state of shock and real gratitude that he had put this huge case that hung over his head for a decade behind him.
But now the sinking of his family yacht in a freak storm in Sicily has sparked fresh tragedy. While his wife has been found, the 59-year-old has not. A father, husband, and tech giant still missing at sea. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News.
We're going to have much more on that story throughout the morning. At 8:15, we'll be talking to the New York Times journalists who covered Mike Lynch's trial and acquittal. We'll also be joined by a reporter from Sicily on the scene, a local reporter at 9:30, and back with Ashna Hiranag, who's there for us at the top of the hour. For now, let's get more on the Democratic convention in Chicago. Joe Biden gave a rousing farewell, saying he'd made mistakes during his 50 years in frontline politics, but he always gave his best. He attacked Donald Trump, urging the party to get behind Kamala Harris, and suggested that democracy itself was at stake in the election. The vice president and presumptive nominee made an appearance of her own early in the convention, and delegates also heard from Hillary Clinton. Let's have a listen.
This November, we will come together and declare with one voice, as one people, we are moving forward. With optimism, hope, and faith.
Do we push forward or pull back? Come together as we the people, or split into us versus them? That's the choice we face in this election. Kamala has the character, experience, and vision to lead us forward.
With faith in each other, hope for a brighter future, and love for our country, we will fight and we will win together.
The vote of each of us cast this year will determine whether democracy and freedom will prevail. It's that simple. It's that serious. And the power is literally in your hands. History is in your hands.
Joining us now to discuss, Sir Peter Westmacott, the former British ambassador to the United States. Great to see you, Sir Peter, as always. I mean, snapshot for us how surprising it is that both parties' conventions have ended up being ones of not just unity, but perhaps more unity than we could perhaps ever have imagined from a moment months before each of them where things were pretty divided.
Well, yes. Can I just add a word, Wilf, before we start, just to say how saddened I was by the news of Mike Lynch, with whom I spent many hours discussing his legal case before he was extradited.
Well, Sir Peter, why don't we start? Let's start on that, please. He's a friend of yours, is he?
Well, yes, he became a friend because we had lots to discuss before he went there, and I personally took the view that it was wrong for him to be extradited to the United States. But it happened. There was not much flexibility in the way in which the extradition treaty is arranged, is implemented, and I thought it was an extraordinary achievement to go there, to face a trial, not to take a plea bargain, and to win. And for this now to happen at his moment of celebration with friends and family, I just think is so sad.
Oh, it is absolutely incredibly sad. Of course, we still hope that he and his daughter and 4 others will be found and found well. He's clearly a fighter.
He is indeed. You know, he was very calm. He was very determined. He was very focused all the way through. He always accepted that his company had been sold for probably more than it was worth, but he had no right to tell the shareholders not to take a good deal. Whether there was a criminal act involved, well, that was what the courts in America and in Britain both looked at, and he was found, all charges were dismissed. So it was an extraordinary vindication, I think, of a brave fighter who was a great tech icon also of British business. Let's not forget that.
Had you spoken to him in recent weeks since he was acquitted?
No, we just exchanged messages, but I hadn't talked to him in person since that happened. But I talked to him a lot.
I don't want to ask you to extrapolate from more than perhaps the messages said, but did you get a tone that he was looking forward to life on the other side of this decade-long court battle he'd faced?
Absolutely, he was. Looking forward to getting his life back and enjoying it a bit. And clearly, that's what he was trying to do with friends and family off the coast of Sicily. As you say, we don't yet know for sure what's happened, but I think we have to fear the worst.
And in terms of just the final thoughts on this, he clearly was on board with members of his family, and as we understand it thus far, his wife Angela is okay. Do you have any messages for her?
I don't know her. I met Mike and his colleagues and his legal advisors, but I don't know Angela, so I think it's best I just keep quiet on that subject.
Well, totally understand, and thank you, Sir Peter, for weighing in on that story. Why don't we pivot back to the US election and this sense of unity coming from the Democratic convention and, a speech from a president who wanted to be the nominee as the warm-up act, as it were. Quite a remarkable turn of events compared to 3 or 4 weeks ago.
I think it is a remarkable turnaround, as you say, compared to a month or so ago, when some of his most loyal supporters, and probably family as well, were saying to the president, especially after the debate, and especially after Trump had been given that new lease of life, if you like, by the narrow escape from the assassin, you're not going to be able to win this, Mr. President, Dad, Joe, whatever. And then he took this extraordinarily difficult decision to not run again. And who voluntarily gives up the opportunity to be the president of the United States, even if you've already done it for one term? So I think the turnaround, and given that everyone was, to be honest, a month or so ago, pretty critical of the prospects of his vice president, Kamala Harris, making a really good fist of taking the baton. And now look at last night. I think that she's got real momentum behind her. The party is united. I thought President Biden was extraordinarily gracious in the way in which he handed to her, if you like, the responsibility for continuing their good work. I thought Hillary Clinton's speech was tremendous as well. Actually, I watched that and was very impressed by that. So I think the convention is unified, lots of support, emotion and so on, and political for Biden. That was his night. And today, if you like, that's now going to be for the vice president, the one who is now seeking to be the president, to show what she's made of and what is her perspective going to be. Yesterday was about Joe Biden. Today and the rest of the week has got to be about Kamala Harris.
I wanted to get
vice president nominee Watts.
I wanted to get your view, Sir Peter, on 3 world leaders and how they'll be watching this election come November. I know as a diplomat that you'll always say that Britain wants to and will work with whoever's president of the United States. But will Sir Keir Starmer, will Prime Minister Netanyahu and will President Zelensky be watching the election and secretly hoping one candidate wins rather than the other?
It's a tough question. I think there are some heads of government around the world who would be very happy to see Trump coming back. It looks as though that's what President Putin would like. He's quite close, of course, to Trump. Zelensky never had a close relationship, and of course Biden has always had it in for him because the whole Ukraine fiasco was the reason why he was impeached the first time round. So my guess is that in Ukraine they would be looking for the continued political support from Kamala Harris that they have had from the Biden administration. Xi Jinping, I think it's very hard to tell. They like predictability, and that's what they would get with Kamala Harris rather than an unpredictable president. But equally, and Trump, of course, is someone who has said he's going to slap enormous tariffs on the imports of all Chinese goods, and they won't like that very much. But he is an individual with whom they may feel that they can do some business. There has been signs of Iranian influence behind the scenes in interfering with the election, but as far as I can see, it looks as though the Iranians have been mucking about on both sides. So I can't quite work out from that whether they want to see Trump or Kamala Harris. But my guess is Kamala Harris, because this is a continuation of a policy of seeking to engage with Iran on nuclear and other issues, rather than just insult them from a distance, if you like.
Does that imply that Netanyahu will want Trump to win, or is that a leap too far?
I would have thought that Netanyahu would rather have Donald Trump in the White House than a Democratic administration where, let's remember, Kamala Harris has been a little more nuanced, a little more critical of what the Israeli Defense Forces are doing in Gaza than even Joe Biden, her boss, has. So I would think that Netanyahu would rather have Trump there. Netanyahu, of course, who campaigned vigorously against President Obama, Joe Biden's old boss, when he wanted the Republicans to win instead of Obama winning a second term. So my guess is yes, because he thinks he would have less difficult questions to answer from President Trump than he would have from President Kamala Harris.
Sir Peter, great to catch up as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Wolf.
So to come here on The Breakfast Show, we'll meet the comedian behind the funniest joke at this year's Edinburgh Fringe.
I'm Dan Whitehead, and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer, and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd, and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back. Well, those of you watching the show yesterday morning will have had to see, I'm afraid to say, me deliver the funniest joke at this year's Edinburgh Fringe, 4 times no less across the 4 hours. But if you missed it, fear not, because we can take you live to Scotland's capital now and bring in the man who wrote and delivered the joke, comedian Mark Simmons. Mark, it's great to have you with us. And as I said just there in the intro, sadly, your joke was butchered by me yesterday a few times. But we're delighted to have you with us. So you can, please, if you will, do the honours of deliver what was this year's funniest joke at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Do you promise to laugh?
Well, I will, because I laughed at it 4 times when I read it out last time, and I loved it. But, you've got some tough customers next to me.
Well, here we go. So I was going to sail around the globe in the world's smallest ship, but I bottled it.
Much better delivered.
They smiled.
They did. No, more than that. And Mark, I have to say, what I find so interesting about this joke, and indeed most of the jokes that made the shortlist, is it's quite, and I don't mean this as a criticism because I laughed at every single one of them, as Sadia and Mari know, it's quite a sort of classic, simple pun, as opposed to I don't know what else somebody would say, more complicated humour. Is that a sign of the times? Is that always the case, in fact? And dad jokes, if I was to describe it that way, which I again embrace, it's a compliment, not a criticism, get more criticism than they deserve?
I think with these particular lists, these sort of jokes are the ones that work best because anyone can read it and enjoy it. But I think there's just comedy's subjective. There's so many different styles of comedy, and there's markets for all the comedy. So it goes through trends, I think. So in Edinburgh, there's a lot of comedy about hard-hitting topics at the moment, which is brilliant. But sometimes I think people just want to come and relax, forget about their troubles, and just enjoy an hour of really silly jokes. So that's where I come in.
Do you think that this joke sums up the best work you've ever done, or did it actually catch you by surprise that this one was selected?
Yeah, I don't think it's my best joke in my show, but I think it is probably the best one written down so that, so everyone can understand it. Personally, I like jokes where you kind of take them down a path and then you suddenly reveal like a nice twist and it surprises everyone and they ignite big laughs. Whereas some of my jokes, they're just clever wordplay and you get kind of a nice little laugh as you go. But it's good in a show to have a variety.
So I've got a question for you. So when you're rehearsing or planning or writing your material, how do you know which jokes are the ones that are going to potentially win you, the top of this hot list, as it were? And how do you know which ones are going to bomb? Do you just have to experiment?
Yeah, I don't ever think about this competition, to be honest, until it happens. It's just a nice bit of fun at the festival. But yeah, so I write so many jokes every year because I have to come up with a new hour. So I go around, I spot wordplay, I write them in my phone, then I sit down and I craft the jokes, and I go to a new material night where you try everything, and that's where you find out whether it works or not, because they let you know very quickly. And then if it works, it's in the set, and if it doesn't, I come back and I reword it, and then I go back to the new material nights, try it again. And I mean, sometimes it can take a joke 3 years to get right, but when it does, it's amazing.
And Mark, I was going to ask, in terms of those moments when a joke doesn't go well, is it mortifying to you? I mean, I think of screwing up in this job, which happens far too often, but I kind of feel like you get away with it and bounce back quite quickly. But cracking a gag that doesn't work, ouch.
In the early days, when you don't really know if you're good at this, it's quite hard, yeah. But once you get to the point where you've done the jokes a million times and they've worked, then you don't question yourself. So if it happens, it can sometimes just be everyone in the room's in a bad mood or something weird's happened in the room. So I actually kind of find it quite funny now when I'm on stage and I tell a joke I've told 100 times and everyone's laughed and then they're not laughing. And it's this weird feeling. It's only people that have done it will know what that's like. But yeah, I don't find it a big problem now. And actually, if you laugh when that's happening, sometimes they come round because they see you're relaxed.
Mark, are you a bit annoyed that your joke has become so famous now and been butchered by TV presenters on breakfast TV?
I really want to hear your version now.
I don't know if that would be the 5th time in a day. No. The only power I have is in this moment, and I think after butchering it yesterday, it's best for everyone that we don't go through it. But I mean, what is interesting is how you frame the different types of jokes in the show and the ones that get drawn out for a competition. I mean, do you think the list as well, the overall 15, is actually not really representative of Edinburgh Fringe and how important Edinburgh Fringe is to a much sort of broader type of both comedy and performing arts?
Yeah, I think it just needs to be taken as the fun it is. It shouldn't be taken seriously. That's not the whole of the festival. I mean, I think so. Within a lot of shows, there are little one-liners. There aren't many shows like mine where it's just all one-liners. But yeah, there's so much to see up here. But yeah, so no, I don't think it's 100% representative, but it is a bit of fun.
Mark, what's up next?
I'm going on tour. Going straight out on tour after Edinburgh. It's my debut tour, and it's been going on for a couple of years now, and we've got our last leg of it. So, yeah, there's no rest for the wicked. I'm straight back out at it.
Well, winning the competition and getting the exposure, I'm sure, will help on that front, and we hope that it does for you. Mark, thanks for joining us, and congrats again.
Thanks very much.
As we leave you, some fantastic pictures. The supermoon last night. If you didn't get a chance to see it, don't worry. Here are those photographs. We'll leave you with them. We'll be back the other side of this short break with all the top stories. Good morning. It's 8 o'clock on today's show. 1 dead and 6 missing after a super yacht sinks in a tornado off the coast of Sicily. We're live on the scene.
And who is Mike Lynch? We'll hear from a reporter who covered the trial and acquittal of the British tech boss, feared lost in that tragedy.
It's Tuesday, the 20th of August. Your headlines.
The search has resumed here off the coast of Palermo after that super yacht capsized and sunk here just behind me. This morning, the divers are back in the water searching for those 6 missing people.
British tech tycoon Mike Lynch is among those missing alongside senior banker Jonathan Bloomer and lawyer Chris Morvillo. Also ahead in his farewell speech to the Democratic Convention, Joe Biden admits he's made mistakes but says he always gave his best.
I've given my heart and soul to our nation, and I've been blessed a million times in return for the support of the American people.
He had hoped that he would be the headline. Instead, he was the warm-up. We will have all the very latest from the first night of the Democratic Party convention here in Chicago.
Plus, the government meets with the rail union this morning for talks on a pay deal to avoid more strikes. And a supermoon lights up the skies around the world. Good morning to you. The search has just resumed in Italy for 6 people missing after a super yacht sank during a tornado yesterday morning. The £30 million yacht was anchored near the port of Porticello in Sicily when the storm hit. Among the 22 people on board were British businessman Mike Lynch and his teenage daughter. Let's bring in Ashna Hiranag. She's in Sicily for us this morning and can bring us up to speed with the very latest on the search for those missing.
We know that there are cave divers from right across Italy that have been brought in to help with this search, which has been going on since about 6:30 local time. They're incredibly experienced, aren't they, in working in these confined dark spaces and to navigate through that debris which is now under the water. They are trying to get to, crucially, that 56-metre super yacht, specifically the hull of it, because they know there are 6 people underneath that water that desperately need saving. We're under the impression now that there are survivors which have been taken to a local hotel here in this small fishing village. Also this morning, we've seen the Coast Guard helicopter flying quite low. They're trying to see whether any of that wreckage from that yacht has risen to the surface. But here is the story of yesterday and what we know so far. In Sicily, they're searching for survivors. 50 metres beneath these now calm waters are the remains of a super yacht. A luxury vessel which was carrying 22 people when it was hit by extreme weather. Relentless rain and wind battered the north coast of Sicily in the early hours of Monday, causing widespread damage on the land and proving fatal at sea. Fisherman Fabio was the first to the wreckage.
There were 2 sailboats half a mile away from the harbour with their anchors at sea. After 10 minutes, we saw a flare in the sky. We waited about 10 minutes to see the intensity of the tornado and went out to sea. We were first to give rescue, but we found no one at sea. We only found cushions and the remains of the boat.
The 56-metre yacht was carrying 12 passengers and 10 crew members when it got into trouble. 15 people, including 35-year-old Charlotte Golunski, her partner and her 1-year-old baby Sophia, managed to escape. But among those reportedly still missing, the boat's owner, British tech tycoon Mike Lynch. The 59-year-old entrepreneur had recently been in the headlines after he was cleared of all charges in a high-profile fraud case in the US related to the sale of his software company. It's believed his wife is one of those rescued, but there are local reports his 18-year-old daughter Hannah is also missing. The weather was so bad overnight that locals describe it being like nothing they'd ever seen before. Water spouts, essentially like tornadoes on the water, tore into the coastline. The yacht had been anchored just over there. The sailing mast lights had been twinkling in the night sky, and by morning, they were gone. As Coast Guards, firefighters and specialist divers continue to search for the missing, investigators are piecing together the yacht's last voyage. It had sailed from the Sicilian port of Milazzo on the 14th of August, making its way towards Porticello. By the 19th, the vessel was recorded as being anchored just off the coast near the village port. That's where it was when the storm hit, leaving passengers scrambling for safety in the dark.
Survivors are not talking much. They are very confused because it happened at night. It was dark and they found themselves in the water. Some of them were lucky enough to save themselves and were taken directly to the emergency room.
As medics tend to survivors, authorities haven't given up on those still lost at sea. Divers have already found one body near the wreckage. And they know, with every hour that passes, this rescue mission moves closer to becoming a recovery. Well, there are some concerns about how, of course, this may have happened. We know that this storm was unrelenting, as I say in that piece, but it lasted something about 15 to 20 minutes. But what makes this super yacht so interesting, but also perhaps concerning with regards to what happened yesterday morning, is that 75-metre sailing mast that it had that was so iconic to the boat. It was made out of aluminium, and it's perhaps thought, there is some speculation, that that volume of cloud and wind, essentially that tornado over water, may have taken out that mast and brought the boat down. But we are in the very early stages of any form of investigation which is being carried out by not only the Port Authority, but those from the UK Marine Accident Emergency Branch 2. Inspectors from there and investigators from there are landing here this morning to aid efforts today. We're also learning a little bit more about those 6 missing people, the identities of whom we now understand to be not only Mike Lynch and his 18-year-old daughter Hannah, but also a man called Jonathan Bloomer. He is the chairman of Morgan Stanley International, and also another man, Chris Morvillo. He is a lawyer from a law firm called Clifford Chance, but crucially, he represented Mr. Lynch during his fraud trial in the United States. Both those men and both their wives are also believed to be missing. The body of that man that they also recovered yesterday morning, Italian media reporting this morning that it's thought to be the chef on board that yacht. But as I say, this morning, efforts are really being made by specifically those cave divers, but also the Coast Guard on water, but also in the air, trying to see what they can, if anything, of any of that debris from that wreckage.
Ashna, thanks so much. Well, less than 3 months ago, businessman Mike Lynch was cleared of fraud over the purchase of his software company Autonomy. His co-defendant in that case, Stephen Chamberlain, also died yesterday in an entirely separate incident. Sadia's here to tell us more about that separate incident. Sadia?
So over the weekend, Cambridgeshire Police put out an appeal for witnesses or any dashcam footage after a man in his 50s, they said, was taken to hospital with serious injuries following a road accident. It has now emerged that that man is Stephen Chamberlain, the co-defendant to Mike Lynch in that fraud and conspiracy trial in the US. It happened just a few days before Mr. Lynch went missing, but it's thought he died last night because even as of yesterday, the police had said that he was still in hospital with serious injuries. He was the former vice president of Mr. Lynch's company Autonomy, and his lawyer confirmed his death last night in a statement saying, "Our dear client and friend Stephen Chamberlain was fatally struck by a car on Saturday while out running. He was a courageous man with unparalleled integrity, and we deeply miss him."
Sadia, thanks so much. To the US now, where Joe Biden has given his farewell speech to the Democratic Convention. The president admitted that he'd made mistakes in 50 years of frontline politics, but said he always had given his best. Here's our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
It was Ashley Biden who ushered her father, the American president, into the convention that he had so bitterly believed should have been his crowning moment. It was always going to be emotional for the Bidens, for the Democratic Party, and so it was. To chants of "We Love Joe" that went on for 4 minutes, they cheered the man who carried this party to victory over Donald Trump 4 years ago, the man they just believed would not be able to do it again.
I made a lot of mistakes in my career, but I gave my best to you. For 50 years, like many of you, I've given my heart and soul to our nation. And I've been blessed a million times in return with the support of the American people.
Well, he had hoped, he had believed that he would be the headline, not the warm-up. But any bitterness he has about being forced aside, it's not been on show. As for the crowd here, for them, this is about thanking him for more than half a century in politics. It was a speech highlighting what he believes to be his achievements, but the framing was we, not me.
When I say we, I mean Kamala and me.
There were his familiar warnings about what he believes to be the existential threat of a second Trump term, but he balanced it with messages of hope and achievement.
MAGA Republicans found out the power of women in 2022. And Donald Trump is going to find out the power of women in 2024.
The night had started with the next generation, the Soul Children of Chicago, and the Star-Spangled Banner to begin this star-studded convention. It's hard to believe that all of this, those new faces, new energy, has all come together in a few short weeks.
This is going to be a great week. And I want to kick us off by celebrating our incredible President, Joe Biden.
This first night was not about her, but about the man who put her here by agreeing to step aside. And those who were instrumental in that push, like Nancy Pelosi, were here now to salute President Biden for passing the baton. But before he would speak, the person who couldn't manage what Kamala Harris thinks she now can, Hillary Clinton. She cracked that glass ceiling, and to roars, she said now is the moment to break it.
On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States.
And so the baton has now been passed. The job he thought he could do is now in the hands of the Vice President, beating the opponent who is now hers, not his. Doubts about her ability, her winnability, may persist privately, but here, for now, no sense of it.
Much more, of course, to come from the Democratic Convention in Chicago in the week ahead. Obama speaking in due course. Of course, Kamala Harris will give the keynote in a couple of days' time on Thursday. Now, the US Secretary of State is on his way to Egypt after what he called a constructive meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We're able to bring in our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. Dominic, where do we stand in terms of hopes that there is a ceasefire deal pending?
Well, there seems to be an increasingly sort of large mismatch between what the Americans are saying and sounding like and what anyone else here is saying across the region. The Americans are still sounding optimistic. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying progress is being made and citing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's approval of this deal as evidence of that. But it's not really clear at all, Wilf, whether there is actually a workable proposal there yet for anybody to accept. And if you look at what Israeli commentators who are close to the government and watching the Prime Minister closely are saying, they aren't convinced that Benjamin Netanyahu actually wants a deal, and they think he probably doesn't because he fears it could torpedo his coalition government. It could lead to far-right hardliners walking out. And they also believe that he still is holding out for this concept of total victory over Hamas, however distant a prospect that still looks. And he's found a way to stymie progress, the skeptics are saying, which is to do with his insistence that the Israeli military stays on the border between Gaza and Egypt, something that Hamas are not going to accept. And he has shifted position on that. And for Hamas's part as well, I think people are pretty convinced that its leader, Yahya Sinwar, doesn't want a deal either, not least because on Sunday he sent a suicide bomber to Tel Aviv, who blew himself up early and so didn't kill anybody. The suspicion is that he was heading towards a synagogue. And the assessment of the Israelis, at least, is that he is planning a bigger war, not just in Gaza, but also using sleeping cells in the West Bank. So it looks as though this talk of sort of progress is rather delusional on the side of the Americans. They will try and keep the talks going, not least because if they collapse completely, it increases the risk of Hezbollah and Iran carrying out the long-awaited vengeful attack they want to carry out to avenge the deaths, assassinations of two senior officials, one from Hezbollah and one from Hamas. But, you know, talking for the sake of talking is not sustainable, and it's certainly not going to end this conflict and the suffering, the terrible suffering of those people in Gaza, or bring the hostages home anytime soon. I think diplomacy will continue, but for now at least, people are not convinced that either side really want a deal at all.
Dominic Wagcombe, as always, thanks so much. Moving on to today's other stories, and Ted Baker is expected to close the rest of its stores in the UK and the Republic of Ireland by the end of today. The firm behind the fashion chain's UK arm fell into administration back in March. More than 500 jobs are thought to be at risk. A group of scientists want primary school children to be given ice lollies during lessons to improve their understanding of science. Members of the Royal Society of Chemistry say licking a lolly in class will help young people learn more about the way temperature works. The Royal Society of Kids supports the moves. The first £1 coins featuring King Charles have entered circulation. The King's official effigy can be seen on the head's side, unsurprisingly, while a pair of bees grace the tail side in recognition of the monarch's passion for conservation. Nearly 3 million coins with the new design will circulate alongside those featuring the late Queen Elizabeth. Time now to talk about the Minister conversation that we had earlier. And members of the RMT union, including General Secretary Mike Lynch, will today meet with the Department of Transport to discuss a new pay offer. Mari, give us context of that. Why are we talking about the RMT? And I guess he's focusing on what was recently offered to ASLEF.
Exactly that, yes. So the ASLEF union, which is the drivers' union, they were offered a 15% pay rise quite recently, and it was seen as this kind of big triumph for the government that finally this really long, ongoing dispute, couple of years, could finally kind of be put to bed. And Labour coming in, a new administration, a kind of fresh kids on the block, as it were, sorting things out. Now, the difficulty with that, as we were talking about earlier, the side note, is that ASLEF have now actually said they're still going to strike because of a separate smaller dispute between themselves and NLER, a train operating company, about working conditions and things like that, rather than pay. And so that slightly undermined this, the branding of this win, let's say, for the government. But you've been speaking to Joe Stevens, the Secretary of State for Wales, this morning. And really, this meeting today, we're not expecting a deal to be reached and everything to be sorted by the end of the day with the RMT, but this is seen as one of several meetings where they can start to really get around the table, have talks, have negotiations, and figure out exactly what they're going to do. As you said, Mike Lynch is going to be there, General Secretary of the RMT union, and he said he wants something similar to the ASLEF union, around that 15% mark. He said he wanted something to be parallel and synchronised to that offer. And this is always the danger, is once you give one union a large payoff, all the other unions are then going to want the same. And so that's the kind of Tory criticism, is that actually Labour have given away too much and now everybody else is going to come out with their hands out. Labour would argue, and she did in the interview with yourself, Joe Stevens, is that actually they are doing what is needed and what is pragmatic with the inheritance that they received from the previous government. Now, we have a clip of Joe Stevens, and what she's talking about in this interview, in this clip, is actually about that small dispute with the ASLEF union and whether it's time for the government to really get involved and muscle in.
We may need to get involved in that, but what we have said to both parties is that they should sort it out straight away. They should get around the table and negotiate, and then we hope that's what they will do.
But you were criticising the government for not having, the last government for not having inserted itself in the way that you have in the main dispute. Can you see that it looks a little bit odd? It looks a little bit like positive.
The previous dispute that we were talking about went on for 2 years, 2 whole years, £850 million of taxpayers' money wasted. And here we are talking about a new dispute where involves one train operating company. And that needs to be resolved locally between the train operating company and ASLEF.
So you see there, Joe Stevens trying to say, actually, this is a small dispute and it's nothing to do with us, essentially, yet, but leaving the window open to be able to get involved. But today's meeting is all about the RMT. It's all about trying to basically prevent more strikes, make sure the RMT have got something that everyone can be happy with, and hopefully we can end the kind of the several-year period of train strikes kind of dominating, especially at Christmas time, for instance. So I think that will be considered a triumph for the Labour government if we don't have mass strikes at Christmas.
All right, great stuff. Thank you. Returning to our top story, and a search effort is underway in Italy to find 6 people missing at sea after a super yacht sank during a freak storm yesterday morning. Among the 22 on board was the British businessman Mike Lynch and his family. He'd been celebrating the end of his decade-long legal battle after being acquitted of fraud just weeks ago. Speaking to us earlier today, the former British ambassador to the US described how he'd got to know Mr. Lynch and paid tribute to him as a great fighter.
He was very calm, he was very determined, he was very focused all the way through. He always accepted that his company had been sold for probably more than it was worth, but he had no right to tell the shareholders not to take a good deal. Whether there was a criminal act involved, well, that was what the courts in America and in Britain both looked at, and he was found when all charges were dismissed. So it was an extraordinary vindication, I think, of a brave fighter who was a great tech icon also of British business. Let's not forget that.
Joining me now is the New York Times reporter Michael J. de la Merster, who covered the trial and the acquittal. Thanks so much for joining us, Michael. Just give us your reaction when the verdict came through and he was indeed acquitted. Was that against all expectation, against your expectation?
I think it was against a lot of people's expectations, and thank you for having me. It was definitely against a lot of people's expectations. As you said, the battle had been going on for about close to 13 years, and he had lost so many fights along the way. He was found liable in the civil trial in the UK. He had been extradited despite lobbying the British government. And prosecutors had basically said that he had orchestrated one of the biggest frauds in Silicon Valley history. I would say that people close to him had believed that he faced long odds. I think that they believed he also thought that he faced long odds, but he was, he had spent so much time trying to defend himself. And I think a lot of people were surprised when he was found not guilty.
In terms of that moment, did you speak to his colleagues, his friends, after the result of the trial and get the sense that he was excited about having a second chance in life almost?
Yes, absolutely. I think that people had gotten the sense from him that he was eager to go back to contributing to investing, research. Even during his trial, he had been aiding research into AI. He was looking into ways that AI could help people with hearing difficulties. He had been eager before his legal troubles really kicked off to be a sort of public intellectual. He was an advisor to David Cameron. That was a sort of role that I think he would have wanted to pick up again once he was acquitted. And certainly his statements to that effect, what he was telling colleagues and friends, was also that he wanted to get back out there.
What sort of coverage did this trial get in the United States? And was there much criticism for prosecutors after the verdict?
There was a fair bit of criticism because people remembered when Hewlett-Packard bought his company, and it was an extraordinary amount of money. And the fact that Hewlett-Packard then quickly soured on the deal, they wrote off nearly $9 billion and said that they had been defrauded. So I think there was a lot of interest in seeing how this happened and who was the man that Hewlett-Packard had accused of masterminding this scheme. I think that people were interested in seeing how someone could face this sort of a legal case for over a decade. And so there was a lot of interest, especially as the trial got nearer, about what had happened and could he possibly pull it off.
Were people expecting there to be repercussions after the verdict? Clearly he was detained, I guess, albeit not incarcerated, leading up to the trial. There's also the question of his CFO, who spent, I think, 5 years in jail previously, and it might have had implications for him. What did people think were going to come next in terms of potential legal action and court cases?
Well, I think that people had sort of thought that Israel, he wanted to lead some sort of reform or something about helping to exonerate people who believe that they've been wrongly accused. That, he had said, was one of his big projects. In terms of the case, again, I think prosecutors thought that they had a pretty strong case and had worked out well with the CFO. So I think, I can't say for certain, but there was a lot of expectation that they would win. And with regards to what else happens, I think that I think that Lynch would say that he would continue to press for changes to extradition laws and just ways of defending UK citizens.
Michael, as I'm sure you know, obviously, Mike Lynch and his 18-year-old daughter are missing. As we understand it, his wife, Angela, is safe. You, I think, attended every day of the trial, as did she. Her support for Mike Lynch throughout has been remarkable.
Yes, absolutely. She had been one of his rocks. When he was first extradited, she came over regularly. She was, by all accounts, someone that he leaned on a lot. She weighed in, provided advice, provided support. She was a crucial person in his camp. She was his partner in all of this.
Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Some breaking news now, and the Israeli military said it's recovered the bodies of 6 hostages in an overnight operation in the Khan Yunis area of Gaza. That breaking news just crossing, of course, in a critical week when talks towards a ceasefire continue, as we reported earlier with Dominic Waghorn, as Secretary Blinken now travels to Egypt. Of course, we'll see whether this particular bit of breaking news has any impact on whether those talks can be successful or not. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show is Labour, a soft touch as more talks take place with unions this morning. We'll be debating whether ministers were right to agree above inflation pay deals. Plus, are the Isle of Man race organisers doing enough to protect riders? We'll hear from one of this year's competitors of what has been a dangerous race. And did you spot the supermoon? We'll bring you the best shots of last night's lunar spectacle.
Haven't been home. I'm sure everyone knows it's been so busy, so it's still settling in, and then doing talks like this and interviews and speaking about it again kind of just brings it back up to level. I picked a bike up as a kid just because that's what everyone did, and like riding around with your friends, going and playing out, playing football, whatever it was, and then seeing kids at the skate park doing tricks. I quickly swapped the bike for a BMX and just spent every waking moment of my day as a kid in the skate park, and it was just a hobby, and it's still now. I'm lucky enough that it's still a hobby. I still love riding, and it's just grown into something amazing. The more eyes you get on the sport, the better. And I think as well, it's often the support of parents who will now know that you can make a career in this sport, might be more likely to push their kids into it rather than a more mainstream sport. So I think if kids saw BMX for the first time in the Olympics, that's a great first showing. And I really hope that kids who saw me ride, if they pick up a bike, that's absolutely amazing for me. Yeah, so the Olympics LA 2028 is definitely a focus of mine. Lucky enough for us, we don't have to qualify just yet. The next event is actually European Championships in September. So it's straight back into it for us. And then we've got British Championships as well as World Championships towards the end of the year. So we've still got a busy back end of the year, which is exciting. People talk about Olympic blues, and I think this is good for our sport, and the fact that we're busy straight after the games, it kind of avoids that because you've got something to work towards. So yeah, excited to try and retain the European Championship in September.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester.
Welcome back. A reminder of the top stories this morning. In Italy, one body's been recovered and the search has resumed for 6 people who are still missing after their yacht sank in a freak storm. The British-registered vessel capsized when it was hit by a tornado. British tech tycoon Mike Lynch is among those missing, alongside Morgan Stanley International Chair Jonathan Bloomer and Clifford Chance lawyer Chris Morvillo. Joe Biden's called on democracy to be preserved. As he addressed the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, the US president appeared tearful during his farewell speech, telling voters to endorse Kamala Harris for the sake of America's future. Members of the RMT union are expected to meet with government officials to discuss a new pay offer for rail staff, which would see the end of further strikes. Bosses, including the union's general secretary, say they want the same terms as has been offered to train drivers. Well, let's get more on that story. Train drivers got an above-inflation pay deal. Members of the ASLEF union did. And now the RMT want the same for their members on the railway. It's not just them. Junior doctors, too, got a big pay rise, of course, recently. So is Labour soft touch on this issue, or caving into the unions, or giving workers what they deserve and getting people back to work? Well, with me this morning, Guardian columnist Owen Jones and former special advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Very good morning to you both. Great to have you with us. Let's start with a big picture question on this. And Charlie, I'll come to you first. Do you think people expect, as and when a deal is done and a pay offer is offered and accepted, that it will put to bed, almost regardless of what the issues are, further strikes from that same union for an extended period of time?
I think that's absolutely right. And what we've seen over the last few days is that the government has rightly met with the unions, that it's agreed a pay offer for a particular group of workers. But the very same union, the very next day, for another particular part of the workforce, have decided to go on even more strikes. So the government is being held to ransom, clearly by its union paymasters. Ultimately, you want passengers to have the service that can be delivered, to get around, to grow the economy, to get, these are hardworking people, they need their transportation. And I'm afraid we're just going to see more and more. So I'm afraid, Mike Lynch from the RMT, different union, is going to meet with government ministers today. He's going to ask for even more cash. I'm all for a hard day's work and a fair day's pay, but it's got to be delivering for passengers.
Oh, and do you think it's an unfair expectation to think that after one settlement is agreed with one particular union, that would lead to no further strikes from the members of that union for at least an extended period of time? Or
no,
not?
I don't. The one statistic that people always have to bear in mind, I think, when looking at the state of this country, is that workers have gone through the longest squeeze in wages since the Battle of Waterloo. That's the last time we had this extended squeeze in wages. The average worker is no better off than they were in 2010. There was no precedent for that. That, I'm afraid, is what this party left this country with. And I think, if we look, for example, at train drivers, we've got a shortage of train drivers in this country. You know what they were coming up with, this lot, before they were turfed out of office? They were suggesting reducing the age of train drivers from the minimum age from 20 to 18 because they couldn't recruit them. If you don't pay workers properly, that's what you end up with. Now, they haven't actually caved into workers' demands. I wish they had. If you take junior doctors, they were asking for pay restoration. That's 35%. They got about 22.5% instead, a lot less. The average nurse, £5,000 poorer in real terms. The average paramedic, £6,500. The consequences of that are the likes of Australia going, oh, nice healthcare workers you've got there. We've got better weather, by the way, and we also have better pay. Do you want to come over here? Many of them are doing that. That has consequences. Look at our waiting list in the NHS. You get what you pay for, and our public services and our public realm are in such a state, partly because we don't pay our workers properly. And that goes for teachers. Again, they've got about a 10% real-term pay cut. Do we want the best teachers teaching kids to make sure that they realise their potential? Personally, I think we do. And at the end of the day, they've suffered this massive cut in wages. Boris Johnson came to power saying we're going to build a high-wage economy. That didn't happen, and this is how you do it.
Your
unions fighting themselves.
Well, I just don't think it's about pay. You've got to reform the service as well, and this is the problem with the deal that's been struck with train drivers, is that there's no reform to the working conditions. So, we're just going to see more strikes take place on a weekend. You don't choose when you travel. You don't choose, by the way, when you're going to see a doctor. So there was a whole dispute. Of course there was over the coalition years when it came to making sure that GPs are open, 7 days a week. You don't choose when you get ill. You should be able to see a doctor. There are people in public sector workers, like the police, like the armed forces, that cannot strike obviously for good reason, to keep us all safe. But we're now seeing above-inflation pay rises for some public sector workers. I'm all for increases in pay, but it's got to be funded. And if you don't fund it properly, what you're going to end up doing is choking off growth, choking off any kind of recovery when we've gone through a huge pandemic, by the way, which has cost a lot of money, where taxes have had to increase. You need to get that tax burden down. You need to grow the economy. You don't grow the economy to share that distribution by more strikes, increase in pay, and by being in cahoots and controlled by your union background.
Terrible economics, which is why...
Oh, in quick response to this,
and by the way, Labour MPs are in the pockets of the unions. They're being funded by the unions, no end.
Well, hold on. Your party's funded by big businesses. I think there's a difference between ordinary workers putting
entrepreneurs.
No, big businesses who
often this economy tick.
Who often pay poverty. The people who make this economy tick are workers. The people who get up every day and they put in hard graft, and they get paid often way too little. Now, what we're looking at here is workers through their unions, democratic organisations, and you say paymasters. The RMT don't fund the Labour Party. They're not affiliated to the Labour Party. Now, I wish Labour did listen more to the trade unions. They've actually run roughshod over a lot of what the trade unions have asked for. They're not giving them the pay that they asked for in the first place. You said about shaking off the economy. Bad economics, and it just shows why we ended up in this place. Just quickly, if you put money in the pockets of workers, what do? They go out and spend it. This lot instead gave tax cuts to rich people. What happens when they save money? They put in a tax haven.
But workers can't get to work if their trains are cancelled because of the strike.
Then fund them properly.
We're getting off the specifics. A very specific question for each of you. Firstly, Charlie, stepping back, is it fair that public sector workers who have less opportunity to quit their job and go and try something else than many others that have gone into the private sector, they might also have been promised from a young age the idea of entering the NHS, a great career ahead, entering public services, a great career ahead, that over a 14-year period, they face quite significant real-term pay cuts. Yes, that has to be paid for. It's not possible to give everyone enormous pay rises all of the time. But there was an extended period, a decade and a half, and inflation is now lower. There's not the same pressures about inflation spiralling. Is it fair, to some extent, their pay plays catch-up now?
Well, as I say, I'm all for a hard day's work and fair day's pay. And if you can increase pay, then that's, you can do that. But it's about government making choices. It's not about being a campaign organisation. They're in government now, the Labour Party. It's a Labour government. But everybody has felt the pinch. Everybody has felt that squeeze.
You haven't.
Let's let him answer.
Have you? No, I don't think you have.
I think everybody has.
Have you personally felt the pinch? Are you struggling?
Of course, everybody has.
Have you paid the pinch? Are you suffering?
I'm not going to be
Well, you said everyone's paid the pinch, and I think this is the problem. We had a conservative.
Everybody has.
I don't think you have. You had a conservative. No. Well, okay. Well, let's talk about people who haven't. No.
You don't know his personal situation.
He's a conservative former political advisor. Calm down. Big businesses who fund the Conservative Party. Let me answer. Big businesses who fund the Conservative Party. Well, you're just going to talk over each other. It's a waste of time.
He was in the middle of his answer. Let's listen to his answer.
He wasn't in the middle of the answer. You asked me a question.
You interrupted by bringing in my personal...
Let's listen to his answer and you can respond.
Everybody has felt the pinch. And I do believe that, Owen. If you don't, that's absolutely fine. But I do think everybody has struggled. Taxes has had to go up for everybody, not least because of a pandemic.
Okay.
Of course there have been issues within the economy. I'm not going to apologise for, trustonomics and things like that. That's not my bag.
Can I answer that?
But everybody has felt the pinch. And I just think with the highest tax burden...
He's just saying the same thing over again. Can I correct what he said or not? Am I allowed to correct what he said?
Let him finish and then you can... Taxes have gone up. They've got to come down. The economy has got to grow. And I just think you're going to choke off that economy. You're going to choke off growth if you keep paying and keep spending money that you don't have. That will lead to higher borrowing, higher taxes for hard-working people that need those train journeys, that need to get to work, that won't be able to if you continue to have strikes, which has been called by the unions.
A lot of prolonged empty nothing there. The richest Britons are doing very well. If you look at the Sunday Times rich list, the combined wealth of the richest Britons is equivalent to the entire economy of Poland. We have a booming rich, the sorts of people who fund the Conservative Party and benefited from Conservative rule. It is insulting to say they've suffered, that they're suffering like everybody is. And the point I make there is tax them properly. I'd prefer to increase taxes on them. They'll still be very rich if you tax them a bit more and use that to invest in our frontline services, which are literally falling apart at the moment. They're disintegrating. And if we want to get teachers and doctors to stay in the NHS, we have a retention crisis with the nurses. 10% or so are vacant. And if we don't pay our nurses properly And it is good economics because they spend money, they invest it in the economy. That's good for local businesses. There's so many communities, you know, in the 1980s onwards, their industries were shattered, often the public sector filled the vacuum, and they never properly recovered. If you've got workers with good wages that can invest in the local service, in their local businesses, that's good for everyone. Instead, your lot just made it, you know, boom time for those at the top, whilst the longest squeeze in wages recorded since the early 19th century.
And say that to the pensioners that are about to lose their winter fuel allowance because this government, oh, good, we agree. There we are.
What do you think I am? Some sort of Thomas thing? I think that's a terrible thing.
I wouldn't make any assertions.
This is a wonderful moment of agreement, so we should pause and enjoy it. But Owen, a specific question though, in terms of how things have unfolded, and I just wonder whether you think from even if it is as simple as this, just from a PR perspective, if you want to bring everyone along, and I think there's nobody in this country that welcomes strikes, least of all, of course, the people striking who really don't want to have to do it. Do you think there has been a communication error, maybe it's as little as that, on the part of the union bosses to agree a pay deal, significant pay deal, whether it's quite as much as is deserved or not, and so soon afterwards be talking about another strike? Do you think that does a damage to the arguments of unions, the way they operate, and striking at the last resort, the way it's played out?
Well, no, I mean, I don't like them to be called union bosses. They're democratically elected, and bosses, the way that sounds is sort of top-down leaders. They're not. They're democratically elected by their workers. Workers don't want to go on strike. They do it as a last resort. The anti-trade union laws in this country are the most restrictive in the Western world. It's very hard to get over the threshold to strike. So if you get to the position where workers want to go on strike, that means they really are at their wits' end because you have to have such an overwhelming mandate. The idea that junior doctors, for example, people who come in to look after people and save people's lives, want to not go into work. Anyone who's met a junior doctor knows that's completely and utterly ludicrous. That goes for all workers. And, you know, the fact is, I'm surprised, and actually I think it's unfortunate, that we didn't have unions being more assertive. What do people expect? If you have an unprecedented squeeze in wages, do you really think workers aren't going to come out on strike and demand an increase in wages? And when we say above inflation, we're not taking into account the pay squeeze over a generation now. We're talking a generation. And what they were arguing for was pay restoration. They're not getting pay restoration. Their pay is not going back to where it was. I think that's unfortunate. So this is a compromise. They're just saying, let's meet us halfway at the very least. Let's have our pay going somewhere back to where it was. That's all they're getting. I don't think that's good enough. And I want, by the way, private sector workers to organise more because a lot of private sector workers aren't unionised. Many of them suffered a squeeze, but I want them to organise as well.
Final word.
Well, that's the point. Everybody has felt the squeeze, as I said earlier on. I'm glad we can agree on that. Because it's people in the private sector that you've just acknowledged that felt the squeeze. Oh, I didn't say rich people have, but I'm saying everybody has felt the squeeze in terms of people that are in the private sector, people in the public sector. But the reason why we haven't had to have these pay increases in the past is because the coalition government had to come in on the back of a note that was left at the Treasury to say there is no money left. So in government, you've got to have tough decisions.
In 2012.
Well, it is the reality, I'm afraid, and that's the kind of world that I live in. It's the reality versus...
You have 14 years to sort things out.
And I'm not saying everything was right. I've talked about trustonomics, which, totally failed.
Is that the only problem in 14 years? Or is it just Liz Truss?
Well, you talk about the past 14 years of the problems. The problems that are coming now are pay deals being agreed by this government with unions, only to see on the back of a set of deals more strikes coming down the line. That is going to harm passengers, it will harm patients, and it will harm the rest of the country.
There won't be strikes if they get the pay
They've called them. We've agreed a pay deal, and there are more strikes coming.
Because their pay's not being restored.
Gents, I'm genuinely very sad to say that we're out of time. You guys should do a podcast. Enjoyed the debate very much, Owen and Charlie. We didn't solve it, but I guess that was the point. Still to come on The Breakfast Show are the Isle of Man motor races safe enough? We'll hear from one of the riders taking part in the Manx Grand Prix. We'll be right back.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky's West of England correspondent.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. We help you to understand the world with us.
I'm Adam Parsons, I'm Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our world.
I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm one of Sky's Midlands correspondents. The reason I do this job is because you never know where it's going to lead.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Welcome back to motor racing, and to take part in the Isle of Man TT would be a dream come true for many drivers, the pinnacle of their ambition, but it's also considered one of the most dangerous motorbike events on the planet. More than 260 riders have died since the inaugural race in 1911. And despite steps to try and make things safer, competitors are still at risk. One rider tragically lost his life during qualifying for this year's Manx Grand Prix, the sister race to the Isle of Man TT. Well, I'm joined now by one of the riders taking part in this year's Isle of Man TT race, James Hillier. James, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you.
No problem. Good morning.
Is this race incredibly dangerous?
I wouldn't say incredibly. No, it is dangerous, but I think that's part of the appeal that we all have to come and compete here, and a fact that we're all fully aware of and unfortunately, often reminded of. But we have to proceed with respect, and it doesn't. I wouldn't say it puts me off. It's what I live for.
Why is it so dangerous for those people that don't know the specifics of this motorbike race?
Well, it's compared to kind of a short circuit controlled environment. This is a closed public roads, nearly 38 miles of varying course around the Isle of Man, with averaging speeds at the TT they're up to 136 mile an hour now average on A roads. So yeah, it's pretty fast, but it's, I would say it's calculated. The safety team here do an amazing job of making that environment for us as good as it can be, or as safe as it possibly can be. There is obviously external influences or occasionally mechanical errors and things that can cause accidents. But again, that's with any extreme sport or I guess motorsport. Any form of motorsport can be dangerous. It adds to the risk factor, which I guess is kind of part of the appeal. And when the odds, I wouldn't say against you, but when it's just part of the whole challenge of competing and taking on this course.
I guess a question from a layman in this perspective is whether, James, you approach the event each year and think it's quite possible that one of my peers, one of my colleagues, possibly even me, could have a really dangerous accident, potentially fatal accident this year. That's a reality you're aware of, and that all competitors obviously don't downplay when it's happened and don't remove the significance of, but are entering the race realising that it's quite possible, even likely each year.
Yeah, I wouldn't say likely, but it's always possible, and you have to respect that. But my outlook on life is that could happen with any, that could happen driving to work to your 9 to 5 in a car accident. It's not, I've lost friends through suicide and car accidents, and all, it's not. The risks obviously are slightly higher here, but for me, life's for living, and I think we all share that outlook on life. It's we're not here for very long in the grand scheme of things. I think a lot of people think they are, but it's not the case. So I kind of trying to squeeze as much into my life as I can. I've started 76 races here at during the TT, and even more with this Manx Grand Prix event. So I've done a lot, lots of tens of thousands of miles around this course, and you just need to respect it and have a good team around you to make sure the bike's safe. There's tick every box you possibly can, but for me, it's no different really to any other extreme sport, that's base jumping or conquering Everest. Unfortunately and frustratingly, the media only seem to jump on to the TT when there is a fatality or negativity. And personally, I think this is the longest running motorsport event in the world in history, and it should be celebrated and supported, and long may it continue.
Well, I'm sorry that you're right. I mean, that is the reason we're attracted to it this week, and I guess we're mainstream news, not sports news. And clearly, a fatality is of significance. I guess just to wrap things up, James, I'm wondering that you're still fully committed and looking forward to the race, and I guess it's really interesting to hear your perspective that you think all the competitors are, and that's a mindset and a commitment to the sport that you all have.
Yeah, for sure. It's my year evolves around racing here, and a lot of the other guys racing in this event, particularly this week, it's a bucket list dream. I think we all share the dream to win a TT, and I have had that dream from a young age, and will continue to chase that dream of winning a senior TT one day. But yeah, it's tricky, and I get it from the outsider's view. But it's I think if you share that passion for what this place means, and not even just the races, every TT I meet people from all over the world, Australia and South America, Canada, and they've been, and the older generation, 70, 80-year-old motorcycle enthusiasts have travelled a long way. It's been on their bucket list their whole life to come and watch here, and it's just it's the pinnacle of motorcycling for me, and I think many could agree with that. It's not for everyone, but it's a special place that needs to be respected and supported.
James Hillier, thanks for joining us. Good luck and stay safe.
Thank you.
Let's have a look at the weather next. We're in an unsettled spell with strong winds and showers, or more general rain spreading from the west, including what's left of Hurricane Ernesto midweek. It's quite windy now, with a scattering of showers in the north and west. Any lingering overnight rain over southeast England and Shetland will soon clear. Most parts can expect sunny spells and a scattering of blustery showers this morning, some heavy with a risk of hail and thunder. That's your weather. As you can see, Sadio and Mari have joined us for the final couple of minutes of the show. We've got a great story. We've got a great story to end the show on. And a road cleaner who was blocked by his employer from accepting money raised by his local community to send him on holiday has won a free trip abroad. A GoFundMe page was set up for 63-year-old Paul Spears by his neighbourhood in Beckenham in southeast London. But his bosses said he couldn't accept the money because it was a breach of contract. Sadie is here with more on the story. So Sadie, just give us the next beat of this story. So what happened next?
So the employer saying that because of breach of contract, he can't accept this gift, which is a very generous gift.
Because the council that arranged it was a client of the company he works for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so a travel agent online came together with this elaborate plan. They called it a non-specific competition. They said it was a very small criteria. You had to be between 62 and 64. Guess how old Paul Spires is. They said you have to be a street cleaner from Beckenham, be loved by your community, and he won the competition. And now here he is out on holiday in Portugal enjoying himself.
I mean, I love the way we got around this. I don't know if my biggest surprise to it is, I mean, you can't really blame the company. It's Veolia Environment. They do a lot of sort of local services. They're a private company employed often by local councils to do things like street cleaning and other stuff. They obviously have various compliance rules, and the world we live in forces companies to have those in place. And, of course, their client is a government organisation where, as we all know from compliance rules, this is tough. I mean, I would have liked to think the world we live in today would have meant, OK, we can let him do this. He's not a journalist. He's not a politician. Crazy that this had to be enforced by the company, but thank gosh. This very clever competition was...
It was a clever way out of it, but it's hard, isn't it? Because the problem is, as soon as you make one exception, then you have to make another exception, and then you end up with this snowball effect. But an interesting thing for the company, they clearly didn't want any bad press about not allowing him to start with, so they said that they would match the donation and give it to a cancer charity. So they've also given that money to a cancer charity as well.
Which, again, shows that they didn't want to stop this from happening, but I guess had their hands tied. Great stuff, guys. Fantastic story to end on. We'll be back after this short break with all of the day's top stories. Good morning, it's 9 o'clock. On today's show, 1 dead and 6 missing after a super yacht sinks in a tornado off the coast of Sicily.
We'll tell you more about the British tech boss still unaccounted for in that tragedy. One diplomat who knew him well told this programme Mike Lynch is a great fighter.
It's Tuesday, the 20th of August. Your headlines.
We're live in Sicily as the search resumes this morning after that yacht, that super yacht, capsized and sunk off the coast of Palermo behind me. 1 dead and 6 people are missing.
British tech tycoon Mike Lynch among those missing, alongside senior banker Jonathan Bloomer and lawyer Chris Morvillo. Also ahead, Israel's military says it's recovered the bodies of 6 hostages in an overnight operation in Gaza. In his farewell speech to the Democratic Convention as president, Joe Biden admits he's made mistakes, but says he always gave his best.
I've given my heart and soul to our nation, and I've been blessed a million times in return for the support of the American people.
He had hoped that he would be the headline. Instead, he was the warm-up. We will have all the very latest from the first night of the Democratic Party convention here in Chicago.
And a Superman lights up the skies around the world. Good morning. The search has resumed in Italy for 6 people missing after a super yacht sank during a tornado yesterday morning. The £30 million yacht was anchored near the port of Porticello in Sicily when the storm hit. Among the 22 people on board and still unaccounted for were British businessman Mike Lynch and his teenage daughter, senior banker Jonathan Bloomer and lawyer Chris Morvillo. Ashna Hurinag is in Sicily for us this morning and joins us now. Ashna, with the latest on the search for those still missing.
Well, this fishing village in Porticello, just off the coast of Palermo, is incredibly busy. It's the hive of activity here today. There is a white tent, a number of fire service trucks that have been set up, almost like this makeshift hub, if you like, and there are people in and out of it, both search and rescue teams, but also divers as well. We saw them boarding their vessel, and they've been taken out just a few metres from the harbour side. That is believed to be the final location that yacht was seen. There are many questions today about how this could have happened. It's understood that this extreme weather, which tore into this coastline, only lasted about 15 to 20 minutes, and there were lots of boats moored in this harbour. It's high season. It is incredibly busy period of time, and there are concerns and also questions about how it was this specific super yacht that fell victim in all of this. There are some questions and speculation about the type of mast it had. It was very unusual in its design. 75 metres was the length and the design of this sailing mast, and it's believed that perhaps it was that was caught in this water spout, this tornado, if you like, this volume of cloud that ultimately led to the boat capsizing. We've got the story now of what happened yesterday. For these divers, this is about rescue and recovery within a wreckage. In Sicily, the day after the tragedy, 6 people are still missing. As below these calm, warm waters, what's left of a super yacht are 50 metres below the surface. The luxury vessel was carrying 22 people when it was hit by extreme weather. Relentless rain and wind battered the north coast of Sicily in the early hours of Monday, causing widespread damage on the land and proving fatal at sea. Fisherman Fabio was the first to the wreckage.
There were 2 sailboats half a mile away from the harbour with their anchors at sea. After 10 minutes, we saw a flare in the sky. We waited about 10 minutes to see the intensity of the tornado and went out to sea. We were first to give rescue, but we found no one at sea. We only found cushions and the remains of the boat.
The 56-metre yacht was carrying 12 passengers and 10 crew members when it got into trouble. 15 people, including 35-year-old Charlotte Golinsky and her partner, managed to escape by balancing her 1-year-old baby above the water. But among those reportedly still missing, the boat's owner, British tech tycoon Mike Lynch. The 59-year-old entrepreneur had recently been in the headlines after he was cleared of all charges in a high-profile fraud case in the US.
He always accepted that his company had been sold for probably more than it was worth, but he had no right to tell the shareholders not to take a good deal. Whether there was a criminal act involved, well, that was what the courts in America and in Britain both looked at, and he was found, all charges were dismissed. So it was an extraordinary vindication, I think, of a brave fighter.
It's believed his wife is one of those rescued, but there are local reports his 18-year-old daughter Hannah is also missing. So too is chairman of Morgan Stanley International Jonathan Bloomer and Chris Morvillo, a lawyer at a major firm, Clifford Chance. Whilst cave divers focus on trying to find the sunken yacht and navigate through the debris and ultimately find those missing people here above water, the Coast Guard helicopter and boats try and see if they can find any wreckage that may have risen to the top. As Coast Guard's firefighters and specialist divers continue to search for the missing, investigators are piecing together the yacht's last voyage. It had sailed from the Sicilian port of Milazzo on the 14th of August, making its way towards Porticello. By the 19th, the vessel was recorded as being anchored just off the coast near the village port. That's where it was when the storm hit, leaving passengers scrambling for safety in the dark. It's understood survivors are staying nearby. They and authorities haven't given up on those still lost at sea. The body of the man found near the wreckage is reportedly the chef on board. Hope is fading with every hour that passes for the others that are still missing. Ashna Aranag, Sky News in Porticello.
Ashna, it just seems so calm and serene behind you now. This tornado, this weather system that came in, how rare was it for that area? And was it completely out of the blue, or were some people warned of it from weather reports and the like? What was the reaction of other boats that were there in the region at the time?
I think the weather, it can be quite deceiving right now. About half an hour ago, it was absolutely pouring it down with rain a second ago. I guess Sicily, because we are in a bit of a remote spot, it tends to have sometimes a microclimate, particularly where we are. Porticello is a fishing village, as I say, that almost juts out just to the east of the city of Palermo, so the weather can be interchangeable. In terms of what you say about it being out of the blue, we've been speaking to one of the inspectors and the Coast Guards that have been going out and about, and he spoke to us in the last half an hour or so about how they're used to experiencing such changeable and unusual climates and scenarios. But he said this was particularly unusual, and in fact the captain of that super yacht, who we're not yet able to name, he was taken to hospital yesterday, and he spoke very briefly to people who were in the foyer, and he just said one line. He said, "We didn't see it coming," and he was in incredible amount of shock, and he was speaking to the nurses there, and he said, and journalists at that hospital said that he appeared to be in tears at times, and it gives you a sense of that shock that he will have been feeling, and the fact that he didn't see it coming tells you all you need to know about the unusual circumstances we're talking about here. Even yesterday when we arrived, we were speaking to people who had gathered here. Of course, it's become a bit of a site for not only locals but also tourists who are in the area too. It's a very unusual thing to see some 50 or so emergency services personnel working on one concentrated piece of water. They know where the shipwreck is. It's just accessing it that is proving incredibly difficult. And ultimately, there hasn't been any news since that last update yesterday, when that body of that one man was found right next to the vessel. Since then, we know that there have been about 15 survivors, but the rest are still missing, and it's their whereabouts and their identities that we're slowly starting to piece together. I mentioned there that the Coast Guard helicopter has been up and down today trying to survey the water. They've been flying really quite low, and that's because even just the tiniest glimpse of a piece of debris or a piece of wreckage can help identify where pieces may have moved, because of course when something like a shipwreck or a wreckage drops that far into the water, there are movable pieces. They could be searching on an incredibly bigger field than they first anticipated. So there are questions, absolutely. The UK Marine Accident and Investigators branch, they are making their way here to Palermo this morning. There's also an investigation being done by the Port Authority too. But for now, this is still a rescue mission. And as the hours pass on with very little news, it's hard to think of it's hard to imagine that it will stay a rescue mission for very much longer.
Ashna, Thanks so much for that, Ashley Hirinag, there for us in Porticello. Well, less than 3 months ago, businessman Mike Lynch was cleared of fraud over the purchase of his software company Autonomy. His co-defendant in that case, Stephen Chamberlain, also died yesterday in an entirely separate incident. Sadia is here to tell us more about that separate story.
Well, just a few days before Mike Lynch went missing, Cambridgeshire Police put out an appeal for witnesses and any dashcam footage for a road accident that occurred there in a place called Streatham, saying that a man in his 50s was taken to hospital following a road accident and he's got serious injuries. And last night, Mr Chamberlain's family, Stephen Chamberlain's lawyer, released a statement to say that he had died. He was vice president at Mike Lynch's firm Autonomy. They were both co-defendants in that recent fraud and conspiracy trial. They were accused of scheming to inflate the price of Autonomy before it was sold to Hewlett-Packard in 2011. Both were cleared, I've got to say, by a jury in San Francisco in June. And the law firm put out a statement last night saying, "Our dear client and friend Stephen Chamberlain was fatally struck by a car on Saturday while out running. He was a courageous man with unparalleled integrity. We deeply miss him."
Sadia, thanks so much. Now, Israel's military says it's recovered the bodies of 6 hostages in an overnight operation in Gaza. Now, I'm now joined by our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. Dominic, is this a development that will be seen as potentially having a significant impact on hopeful ceasefire talks?
Well, I think in the sense that it underlines the urgency for Israelis to get hostages out of Gaza before any more die, yes, and that's certainly, something that is focusing the minds of all negotiators in this process, and it's something that Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, when he was here yesterday, stressed to Israelis. He said, the deal that he's trying to put together and he's put to the Israelis, and he wants Hamas to approve as well, could be the last best chance to get hostages out alive, because if these talks fail, and at the moment it looks like they're not going in the right direction, then it could be some time before negotiations gather any momentum again. And, in that time, many hostages and many more could die. I mean, it's up to around, I think, 115, 120 hostages have not been returned from Gaza, are still in Gaza, still missing there. But it's thought, between 60 and 70 of them could be dead, so maybe only 50 left alive. So, yes, certainly this underlines the need to get them out. And we have some of the details of these 6 men whose bodies were found in a tunnel under Han Yunis overnight. One of them is a British Israeli, Nadav Popperwell. He's 51. He was 51. He was taken with his mother from their kibbutz on October the 7th. She was released in November. He's now confirmed to have died because his body has been recovered, along with the body of Alex Danzig, 76 years old, who was a historian of the Holocaust. He was born in Poland. He studied the Holocaust for much of his life and is now confirmed to have died in the greatest loss of Jewish life since the Holocaust. And Yagav Buchtav was the youngest of the men whose bodies had been found in Gaza. He was taken with his wife Rimon on October the 7th. They were held together, and she was released in November, and she described how she refused to leave initially, didn't want to leave her husband Yagav behind, but she was told that she'd be dragged out if she didn't leave with her Hamas captors. Now she has confirmed the tragic news that her husband has died.
Dominic, I wanted to ask as well about the broader tensions in the region, which I guess we haven't talked about as much of late as we've focused on the hopes for a ceasefire talk between Israel and Gaza. What is the latest in terms of the tensions with other players and Iran in particular?
Well, I mean, those tensions are not going away, and that's something that Antony Blinken reinforced as well as making the point that for Israelis this could be their last best chance of getting the hostages out of Gaza. He also said that it could be the best chance of reducing those tensions, and he urged all the players, all the actors in the region on all sides not to do anything to raise those tensions or raise the prospect of a much bigger war. The fact is, Israelis have been bracing themselves for more than 2 weeks now for the possibility of Iran and Hezbollah taking vengeance for the assassinations of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran and also Fuad Shukr, a Hezbollah commander in Beirut. And what the Iranians and Hezbollah have kind of indicated is that they are going to see how these talks play out, and then they could carry out that retaliatory action if the talks don't achieve anything, which I think is one reason why I think it's fair to say most observers here in Jerusalem don't believe these talks are going anywhere, not least because they don't believe the leaders on either side, either Hamas's leader Yahya Sinwar or the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, really want to have a deal for their own individual reasons. But despite the kind of scepticism about the prospects of success in these talks, the Americans are talking them up. And I think the expectation is, even if they're not going anywhere, the Americans are going to keep them going, not least because once they fall apart, that does increase the risk, the danger of Iran and Hezbollah launching an attack on Israel. You know, I guess there's a limited amount of time that can go on for. If these talks do turn out to be a kind of delusional charade, eventually Hezbollah will want to make its point. And it's thought Iran is kind of outsourcing all this to Hezbollah. So I think the expectation is certainly that Hezbollah will do something in the coming days or weeks, regardless of what happens in these talks eventually.
Dominic Wackel, as always, thanks so much. To the US now, where Joe Biden's given his farewell speech to the Democratic Convention. The president admitted that he'd made mistakes in 50 years of frontline politics, but said he had always given his best. Here's our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
It was Ashley Biden who ushered her father, the American president, into the convention that he had so bitterly believed should have been his crowning moment. It was always going to be emotional for the Bidens, for the Democratic Party, and so it was. To chants of "We Love Joe" that went on for 4 minutes, they cheered the man who carried this party to victory over Donald Trump 4 years ago, the man they just believed would not be able to do it again.
I made a lot of mistakes in my career, but I gave my best to you. For 50 years, like many of you, I've given my heart and soul to our nation. And I've been blessed a million times in return with the support of the American people.
Well, he had hoped, he had believed that he would be the headline, not the warm-up. But any bitterness he has about being forced aside, it's not been on show. As for the crowd here, for them, this is about thanking him for more than half a century in politics. It was a speech highlighting what he believes to be his achievements, but the framing was we, not me.
When I say we, I mean Kamala and me.
There were his familiar warnings about what he believes to be the existential threat of a second Trump term, but he balanced it with messages of hope and achievement.
MAGA Republicans found out the power of women in 2022. And Donald Trump is going to find out the power of women in 2024.
The night had started with the next generation, the Soul Children of Chicago, and the Star-Spangled Banner to begin this star-studded convention. It's hard to believe that all of this, those new faces, new energy, has all come together in a few short weeks.
This is going to be a great week, and I want to kick us off by celebrating our incredible President Joe Biden.
This first night was not about her, but about the man who put her here by agreeing to step aside. And those who were instrumental in that push, like Nancy Pelosi, were here now to salute President Biden for passing the baton. But before he would speak, the person who couldn't manage what Kamala Harris thinks she now can. Hillary Clinton. She cracked that glass ceiling, and to roars, she said now is the moment to break it.
On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States.
And so the baton has now been passed. The job he thought he could do is now in the hands of the Vice President, beating the opponent who is now hers, not his. Doubts about her ability, her winnability, may persist privately, but here, for now, no sense of it.
Much more, of course, from the Democratic Convention throughout the course of the week. Moving on, though, now to some other stories. Ted Baker is expected to close the rest of its stores in the UK and Republic of Ireland by the end of today. The firm behind the fashion chain's UK arm fell into administration back in March. More than 500 jobs are thought to be at risk. A group of scientists want primary school children to be given ice lollies during lessons to improve their understanding of science. Members of the Royal Society of Chemistry say licking a lolly in class will help young people learn more about the way temperature works. The first £1 coins featuring King Charles have entered circulation. The King's official effigy can be seen on one side, while on the tail side, a pair of bees grace the coin to recognise the monarch's passion for conservation. Nearly 3 million coins with the new design will circulate alongside those featuring the late Queen Elizabeth. Mari's joined me here to discuss the political story of the day. Members of the RMT union, including General Secretary Mike Lynch, will today meet with the Department of Transport to discuss a new payoff that the Rail Workers Union is hoping it can secure the same deal recently agreed between the government and train drivers to end their strikes. Give us, Mari, some of the context as well, because there's an ASLEF deal on the table, but there's also a separate ongoing threat of strikes from ASLEF in a separate dispute.
Yeah, exactly that. So, this meeting today is about the RMT, but as you say, for context, the ASLEF union, which is the union that is the train drivers, they recently were offered a new pay deal that was 15%, and that included a 4.5% pay rise for 2024-2025, and they accepted that. And that was considered to be quite a big win for the government. It was them trying to say, hey, you know, we've been in office barely a few weeks and already we're fixing all the problems that the previous government left for us. We're going to end the strikes. We're going to just get the country back working again, making sure that things can kind of oiling the cogs and wheels, as it were, of the system. And then, as you say, a bit of a snag came along when the ASLEF union said that they're going to strike nonetheless about a different dispute. It's not a dispute about pay with the government. It's a dispute about working conditions with LNER, a train operating company. And therefore, what they're saying, actually, is that yes, they're happy with the pay deal and they're pleased with that, but they're still not happy with their working conditions, which is why they are deciding they're going to strike. Quite embarrassing for the government after that big supposed triumph. Now, you were asking Jo Stevens about this morning, and she was arguing that that dispute is a small dispute and something that they should get around the table and sort as soon as possible, but she still left the window open for the government getting involved. I think we've got a clip now.
We may need to get involved in that, but what we have said to both parties is that they should sort it out straight away. They should get around the table and negotiate, and then we hope that's what they will do.
But you were criticising the government for not having, the last government for not having inserted itself in the way that you have in the main dispute. Can you see that it looks a little bit odd? It looks a little bit like positive.
The previous dispute that we were talking about went on for 2 years, 2 whole years, £850 million of taxpayers' money wasted. And here we are talking about a new dispute where it involves one train operating company, and that needs to be resolved locally between the train operating company and ASLEF.
I guess the question from here, Mari, is if there are further strikes from this particular union of train workers and train drivers specifically, will that damage the government when they had previously announced and kind of sought, not praise, but maybe praise for having settled the larger dispute? Will they suffer in voters' eyes if there's now a further strike, almost regardless of whatever the nuanced reason is for it?
I think absolutely. I think that especially when you have used your election campaign for quite a long time criticising the previous government for not being able to sort and fix the strikes, and the previous government saying, oh, it's nothing to do with us, we're staying out of it, etc., you can't then use the same excuse. And journalists like us will very happily play those clips back to them of them criticising a different government for doing the same. So they will be blamed, even if they say it's a new dispute and it's not to do with them. I think the critical point is really Christmas. If we have strikes, rail strikes across the Christmas period, that could really damage the government because people will feel like nothing has changed. But the meeting today is a separate union, it's the RMT, and they were not expecting a deal to be done today, but it will be kind of a step on the way, hopefully, to ending strikes.
Mari, great stuff. Thanks so much. Lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Show. We'll be live in Sicily once again with the latest on the yacht disaster as rescue teams continue their search for 6 people still missing at sea. We'll be joined by a local Sicilian journalist next.
having been home, I'm sure everyone knows it's been so busy. So it's still settling in, and then doing talks like this and interviews and speaking about it again kind of just brings it back up to level. I picked a bike up as a kid just because that's what everyone did, and you know, like riding around with your friends, going and playing out, playing football, whatever it was, and then seeing kids at the skate park doing tricks. I quickly swapped the bike for a BMX and just spent every waking moment of my day as a kid in the skate park, and it was just a hobby. And it's still now. I'm lucky enough that it's still a hobby now. I still love riding, and it's just grown into something amazing. The more eyes you get on the sport, the better. And I think as well, it's often the support of parents who will now know that you can make a career in this sport might be more likely to push their kids into it rather than a more mainstream sport. So I think if kids saw BMX for the first time in the Olympics, that's a great first showing. And I really hope that kids who saw me ride, if they pick up a bike, that's absolutely amazing for me. Yeah, so the Olympics LA 2028 is definitely a focus of mine. Lucky enough for us, we don't have to qualify just yet. The next event is actually European Championships in September. So it's straight back into it for us. And then we've got British Championships as well as World Championships towards the end of the year. So we've still got a busy back end of the year, which is exciting. I mean, people talk about Olympic blues, and I think this is good for our sport, and the fact that we're busy straight after the games, it kind of avoids that because you've got something to work towards. So yeah, excited to try and retain the European Championship in September.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester.
Welcome back. 2 more people have been named as among the 6 missing off the coast of Sicily. Banking boss Jonathan Bloomer and lawyer Chris Morvillo were on board the super yacht with British businessman Mike Lynch when the boat sank. Joining us now from Palermo is the journalist Piero Messina. Thank you so much for joining us, Piero. Well, piece together for us how you assess what actually happened to this super yacht based on what you have learned so far.
Okay, hello everybody, and thanks for the connection. We are in this moment on the north coast of Palermo, about 10 miles from the exact point where the Bayesian yacht sank 2 days ago at 4 a.m. There were 22 people on board the yacht, including passenger and crew members. There are only 15 survivors. Only one dead recovered, the cook of the ship, and there are 6 people missing. Among them, you remember Mike Lynch, the English tycoon, and also Jonathan Bloomer, president of Morgan Stanley, that is between the passenger of the crew. The rescue continued this morning. Especially cave divers from Brigade are also under the sea to rescue the body of the people that probably is inside the hull of the boat sank 2 days ago. A group of investigators arrived from United Kingdom because the boat was under red sign, which means that UK authorities will be involved in the investigation. 4 people coming from UK, so the Marine Accident Investigation Branch are working with Italian prosecutor and Italian investigator. Also, information. It's important to do
Oh, Piero, I was going to ask as well what people's assessment is for why the boat went down.
Oh, the boat went down because the boat was anchored at 500 meters from the coast of the little port of Santa Flavia. And that means that it was not in a safety place. This is the words of some fishermen of the place that told me that they never seen a storm like that, but it was not safe to stay so far from the coast. The Italian authorities sent a red alert on the afternoon and to inform all the people around the coast that there was a storm coming. So I think the authorities will have to clarify what's happened. It was at least 4 in the morning 2 days ago, and the tailwind struck directly the boat. Maybe the mast of the boat broken, and the bison leaned on the side and sank in a few minutes. The rescue was possible because near to the bison there was a Dutch sailboat, and they arrived with some tender to rescue only 15 people. Maybe the people on the board was asleep because it was 5 in the morning, on the 5th morning. So we have to wait a lot of time because to rescue the body on the boat will be not simple. It's not a simple operation. And authorities will try to clarify with testimonies. There are also eyewitnesses that can send a story that they saw from the coast, and all the people rescued that actually stay in a resort hotel near Palermo, and they are really shocked for what's happened. I remind you that the wife of Mr. Lynch has been rescued, but between the people that are missing too, there is also the daughter of Mr. Lynch.
Piero Messina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, and have a nice day. It's a good job.
Still to come here on The Breakfast Show, has Scotland got hold of its drug death crisis? We'll bring you the latest figures after this short break. Welcome back. A reminder of the top stories this morning. In Italy, one body has been recovered and the search has resumed for 6 people who are still missing after their yacht sank in a freak storm. The British registered vessel capsized when it was hit by a tornado. British tech tycoon Mike Lynch is among those missing, alongside his teenage daughter, senior banker Jonathan Bloomer and lawyer Chris Morvillo. Israel's military says it's recovered the bodies of 6 hostages in an overnight operation in Gaza. It comes as the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken makes his way to Egypt after what he called a constructive meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Joe Biden has called on democracy to be preserved as he addressed the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. The US president appeared tearful during his farewell speech, telling voters to endorse Kamala Harris for the sake of America's future. Some breaking news now. The annual figures for the number of drug-related deaths in Scotland have been released by National Records of Scotland. Let's get out to Connor Gillis, our Scotland correspondent, who has all the details for us. Connor.
Yeah, well, here we are yet again, the annual depressing drumbeat, that rhythm that has become all too familiar here in Scotland when it comes to drug deaths north of the border. In 2023, 1,172 people lost their lives to drugs here in Scotland. That is a 12% increase on the previous year. Now, there had been some small hopes this time last year when there had been a small decrease that things may be turning, the tide may be turning when it comes to this shameful tag that Scotland has been branded with for so many years. But lo and behold, that is not to be the case. A 12% increase on last year. Clearly, Scotland still riddled with this problem. To put that in context, it is the worst drugs death rate in Europe. When it comes to drug poisoning, it's 2.5 times higher a rate compared to England and Northern Ireland as well. And many people constantly ask this question: why Scotland? Why is this so much worse here in Scotland? Well, clearly, experts have suggested for a long time that poverty is a key driver in this, and these figures released in the past few minutes suggest that people living in Scotland's most deprived communities are 15 times more likely to die from a drugs overdose than if they don't live there. But another big issue that experts have been finding over the past year or so, and growing prevalence, has been what's known as polydrug use, this mixing of lethal cocktails of substances, street drugs like street benzos, street diazepam, street Valium, that are 4, 5, 6 times as stronger as the prescription drugs as well. And when you mix that with the likes of heroin and other drugs, it leads to this huge spike in deaths. It leads to these very deadly consequences. One particular trend that experts have also been talking about in the past few days around the figures of number of people dying is this combination of a new drug that has been on the rise recently called xylazine. Now, it is a powerful animal tranquilizer, and that is being combined with the likes of fentanyl, and that is being called by some experts a zombie drug. How has that played in to the figures here? Now, clearly the Scottish Government is in full control of this, is fully responsible in this area. They have said that they have invested record numbers of money, £250 million to try and turn the tide on this shameful tag that Scotland bears. But many people will be questioning today, as these figures continue to rise, a 12% rise, whether that strategy is working. And that's certainly something that we'll be interrogating across the day here on Sky News.
Connor, as always, great stuff. Thanks so much. Now, Paris 2024 proved to be an unforgettable Games for Team GB's swimmers, not least Bristol duo Izzy Thorpe and Kate Shortman, who secured the squad's first artistic medal. Now, the country's governing body for the sport is hoping their success will encourage more youngsters to take the plunge, the artistic plunge, no less. Well, I'm pleased to say that Izzy joins me now alongside Swimming England's Chief Executive, Andy Salmon. The aptly named Andy Salmon, I might add. Great to have you both with us, and very good to see you. Izzy, first and foremost, how ever-present has that smile been on your face since picking up that medal?
It's definitely not come off my face yet, but it's definitely not sunk in that I've won an Olympic medal. I still can't quite believe it, but yeah, I'm still super happy, and it's been a massive whirlwind. So yeah, it's just amazing.
Has it been a challenge returning? I'm not really sort of in a negative way, but have you been stopped in the streets? Have your family and your friends been desperate to come around and see your medal?
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of friends and family coming over to see me, and a lot of people that have supported me along this journey, which has actually it's been so nice to get all the support. Haven't been stopped in the street, so maybe that will happen soon. But yeah, I'm just really glad that everyone's kind of got behind us along this journey, and I've been able to see them and show them my medal, because they're such a big part of my journey as well.
Andy, how important is it to make sure that all of the athletes have the right support when they come off these, well, it can be highs and lows, I guess, depending on which athletes we're talking about, but the intensity and the focus that they've just experienced at the Games?
Yeah, it's absolutely everything. And I think, Izzy is a great example of how the support of the National Lottery, through UK Sport makes all the difference. And I can see Izzy nodding here. It's absolutely crucial. And the improvement that the girls have made over the 3 years since Tokyo is just off the charts. Something that I, as a layperson, probably don't truly understand, but it's all possible because of all the hard work they put in, the phenomenal coaching and support around them, but all made possible by that investment, that financial investment into them. So it's crucial.
And Andy, break down for us the size and scale, whether we look at it at funding level or number of competitors level of artistic swimming compared to the more regular racing.
Yeah, artistic swimming is one of 4 disciplines that fall under Swim England's remit, and along working with our colleagues at Aquatics GB. And it's one of the smaller disciplines, but what this opportunity now gives us is the opportunity to say to children up and down the country, you could be the next Izzy. This could be you in 8 years or 12 years' time, and everything's possible. But before that, get into swimming, register for swimming lessons. We've done some research that shows that the benefits of swimming lessons go way beyond the ability to swim and to stay safe. It increases your confidence, accelerated by Izzy's achievement in Paris.
Is that something you really hope to do, to inspire more to take up not just swimming broadly, but specifically artistic swimming?
Yeah, for sure, 100%. I think that it's so important, as Andy said, to get kids into swimming. And that is kind of the base for other sports such as artistic swimming or water polo or even diving. I think for all the aquatic sports, it's so important to have that. And then also just for life skills, it's so important to be able to swim.
Andy, I would imagine, compared to some sports, most kids do at least try swimming. Is your task to try and inspire more to end up being athletes a slightly different one than, say, a more niche sport, for example, that maybe gets a spotlight for the very first time that kids don't even try at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Swimming is the most participated sport in the country. Perhaps not everybody recognises that. So our mission really is to make sure that every single child in the country has the opportunity to learn to swim. And that first and foremost is about the ability to swim, to stay safe. But then it's also about all those other social benefits that I listed. And then a very small number will be committed, dedicated enough, lucky enough, talented enough to follow Izzy's example and go all the way through. But at the first instance, as I say, it's very much about making sure every single child has that benefit, and that parents up and down the country recognise the benefits that swimming lessons can bring to their children.
Izzy, talk to me about some of the skill sets that you think have to come together to reach the top, as you have in artistic swimming. It's quite a broad range, I would imagine, that brings in the artistic side, the dancing side, I guess, but also the endurance and the power that you would need to do it in the water.
Yeah, so our training actually requires a lot of different elements of different sports, I guess. We do a lot of gymnastics training, normal swimming training, weightlifting. So we have a really wide variety. So I think it's a super fun sport for boys and girls to get into, because it keeps you really engaged and really interested. And to see more girls and boys showing interest is just, it makes me really happy. And I hope that I can create that platform for more people to see that and to see how fun the sport is and to get more people engaged in it.
Andy, how many Olympians do you hope will be within the artistic swimming team of Team GB at the next Olympics?
Well, more than we had in Paris, and who knows? As you know better than I, hopefully we'll see Izzy there again. I'm sure you're contemplating that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's look forward to Los Angeles with great optimism.
Thank you both so much for joining us, and congrats again, Izzy.
Thank you.
We've got lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Show. We'll also have these incredible pictures of the supermoon.
Haven't been home. I'm sure everyone knows it's been so busy, so it's still settling in. And then doing talks like this and interviews and speaking about it again kind of just brings it back up to level. I picked a bike up as a kid just because that's what everyone did. And, you know, like riding around with your friends, going and playing out, playing football, whatever it was. And then seeing kids at the skate park doing tricks, I quickly swapped the bike for a BMX and just spent every waking moment of my day as a kid in the skate park, and it was just a hobby. And it's still now. I'm lucky enough that it's still a hobby now. I still love riding, and it's just grown into something amazing. The more eyes you get on the sport, the better. And I think as well, it's often the support of parents who will now know that you can make a career in this sport, might be more likely to push their kids into it rather than a more mainstream sport. So I think if kids saw BMX for the first time in the Olympics, that's a great first showing. And I really hope that kids who saw me ride, if they pick up a bike, that's absolutely amazing for me. Yeah, so the Olympics LA 2028 is definitely a focus of mine. Lucky enough for us, we don't have to qualify just yet. The next event is actually European Championships in September. So it's straight back into it for us. And then we've got British Championships as well as World Championships towards the end of the year. So we've still got a busy back end of the year, which is exciting. I mean, people talk about Olympic blues, and I think this is good for our sport, and the fact that we're busy straight after the games, it kind of avoids that because you've got something to work towards. So yeah, excited to try and retain the European Championship in September.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. Greg Milam, Sky News, Manchester.
You want to talk business? Meet me in the On-Board Lounge. Fly Emirates, fly better.
Do you know what kind of pollen gets up your nose? Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
Well, southeast England and Shetland look wet for a time, brightening by mid-morning. Then most parts can expect sunny spells and a scattering of blustery showers, some heavy and thundery. They'll be concentrated in the northwest, fairly isolated in the south. It'll be rather cool again and windy. Southern parts will largely dry up later, while the northwest will see showers into the evening. Pollen and fungal spore levels will be high in the drier south, falling to moderate through central parts and low in the north.
Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
To the US now, and Joe Biden has addressed the Democratic National Convention on day one in Chicago. Rather than a rousing election speech, it was a farewell from the president, who called on voters to put democracy first and vote for Kamala Harris. Well, she made a surprise appearance ahead of Thursday, when she's expected to be confirmed as the party's presidential candidate. Also taking to the stage, First Lady Jill Biden and former Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. Let's take a look back at the key moments.
This November, we will come together and declare with one voice, as one people, we are moving forward. With optimism, hope, and faith.
Do we push forward or pull back? Come together as we the people, or split into us versus them? That's the choice we face in this election. Kamala has the character, experience, and vision to lead us forward.
With faith in each other, hope for a brighter future, and love for our country, we will fight and we will win together.
The vote of each of us cast this year will determine whether democracy and freedom will prevail. It's that simple. It's that serious. And the power is literally in your hands. History is in your hands.
Well, lots more coming, of course, from the Democratic National Convention throughout the week, building up to the key address from Kamala Harris on Thursday. Now, a fun story to start to wrap things up. A road cleaner who was blocked by his employer from accepting money raised by his local community to send him on holiday has, in fact, won a free trip abroad. A GoFundMe page was set up for 63-year-old Paul Spears by his neighbours in Beckenham in south-east London. But his bosses said he couldn't accept the money because it was a breach of contract. Well, Sadia and Mari are both here to discuss this story. And Sadia, just give us a bit more of the context of this. So he was blocked by his employers, but did ultimately get around it. How do we get around it?
This is what the world looks like when there are no lawyers involved, I guess. I probably get myself into trouble with the Sky News lawyers by saying that. But listen, what happened was the company said that by accepting this gift from the local residents, he would be in breach of contract with the local council, which is the client of the company that deals with these waste management systems for local authorities. And so what the local residents had to do was they found a tricky way around it. They had a competition. Of course, there was only one person that could enter that competition because you had to have a very strict criteria, be between the ages of 62 and 64, be of someone whose surname is Spears, someone who is a street cleaner and much loved by the community in Beckenham. So not everyone could enter this competition. So, and guess who won?
Well, I imagine the Paul, who we can see enjoying himself now. The question, Sadia, then is, I guess, if a political party wanted to try and carry favour with our esteemed political correspondent here, they could create a competition.
A very strict competition. Which destination would you choose?
Oh, well, I'd go to Japan.
Well, there we go, if anyone wants to. Maybe, are we allowed to enter competitions? No, alas, not. I mean, I have to say the perspective on this is the other way around. He's not a journalist, he's not a politician. I don't particularly blame the company for not allowing it, because clearly they must have some rules in place. I don't think they wanted to stop him from enjoying himself. But it's a kind of crazy world that we live in, that the company feels restricted enough, exactly, that they had to block it and create this this backdoor way. Well, we hope he's having a great time. He's on holiday this week now, currently?
Yes, currently on holiday, yeah. And
he's with his brother, the pictures. I think he's with his brother.
Yeah, with his brother, enjoying a week where he'd first ever gone on holiday in Portugal. That's only his second time going abroad for a holiday. Now, we've got another great story to end with as well. All eyes were on the skies last night, as, if you don't go to bed super early, that is, as the blue supermoon put on a lunar light show. If you didn't get a chance to see it, here are some of the pictures from around the world. The supermoon is given its name because the full moon is a little closer to Earth than usual in its orbit, making it appear bigger and brighter. It's the first of 4 supermoons expected across the next 4 months. It was especially rare, also being a blue moon, which occurs every 2 to 3 years. The moon was seen here above the Temple of Poseidon, just south of Athens, which Mari, I know, was about to tell us. Elsewhere, stargazers gathered on the beach in Rio de Janeiro to watch the moon rise over the city's iconic Sugarloaf Mountain. And those who were lucky enough to get a ride on a cable car were treated to a particularly stunning view of it as well. The fact this was even coming completely passed me by. Did you know this was coming?
I had no idea.
No.
Not until I saw the notification on the Sky News app. And actually,
good plug.
It's actually quite okay to go to bed early and wake up if you get photographs as good as that, isn't it?
Yeah. Another good
Some
bloke.
of those pictures were really incredible.
You're trying to offset your negative lawyer comment that the boss is digging yourself out. Quite effectively.
I would have loved to have been in that cable car. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
That would have been absolutely stunning.
I mean, supermoons, which I must admit, not only did I not know one was coming, I'm not sure I even knew what it was before this morning. It's almost better than an eclipse, aren't they? More easy to look at.
Yeah.
Seems like it was up there for longer, not that
Nice
moment
and
in
true.
time
Exactly.
that's come and gone.
And then you have all this build-up with the eclipse, and then there's clouds and you can't see anything. That always happens.
Anyway, there we go. Great pictures overnight that you can enjoy on the Sky News app and website if you haven't already. We're going to quickly mention the weather here today, as expected. We're in an unsettled spell. Strong winds and showers or more general rain spreading from the west expected, with what's left of Hurricane Ernesto coming midweek. We're out of time here on the show. Thanks so much for watching. Up next, Sky News Today.